Hey guys, welcome to the Fried Circuit, the CAJCS Full Steam Ahead podcast, hosted by Saksham Sood.
I'm Ved Prasad, and we're here to talk about everything related to STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, art, and math. These are some things that we are very interested in, so we're just here to talk
Yeah,
about it.
yeah, me and Ved are two high school students, and we talk about everything that we're interested in. So we welcome all high schoolers like us, all parents, anyone who really likes us and the content that we cover. You're welcome here. A brief introduction about CJCS Full Steam Ahead. CJCS Full Steam Ahead is a student-run society in the Cathedral and John Connon School, Mumbai, where we do projects, we create content, organize competitions regarding, as we had said, STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. You can find out more about our work at cathedralfsa.com. We have a coding competition coming up, CathCon 2021, in August. Registrations for that are now open at cathcon.cathedralfsa.com. And now on to today's podcast.
Yeah, but before we start with today's episode, back in episode one, we promised to bring some guests on here once in a while. So
Yeah,
today we've done exactly that. He's someone who's extremely passionate about the automotive industry, follows the industry very closely. He's extremely fond of motorsports, and he's an incoming freshman at Warwick University where he plans to study automotive engineering. Um,
yeah, and
Ashram?
apart from all that, he's also one of the most fun seniors that we've had through our experience in high
Yes.
school. One of the funniest guys we know, and he has taken time out of his busy schedule before going to university to come and chat with us on this podcast and talk about stuff that we're interested in. So yeah, let's bring him in.
Yeah. So his name is Hushrav Buhariwalla, and I'll just let him write it.
Yep. Hi, Hushrav. What's up?
Hi,
Hey
Hushrav.
guys, what's up?
So, on today's podcast, we're covering cars, and since Ved and I are both 17 years old, we've never driven a car, we're a bit underprepared. So, we got Hushrav on, who's an adult, and he has a license, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
and that's gonna help us cover cars in a better way. And with an expert on our team, we should be able to get through the topic today. So, yeah, Hushrav, tell us a bit about yourself. Like, what are you interested in? What are you doing? What's happening these days?
Okay. So obviously, one of the first things Saksham mentioned, recently turned 18, so recently got my learners. Quite an experience, I must say,
Yeah.
with the way the Indian driving system works. But beyond that, well, I'm just counting my days down till I'm off to uni. So I'm heading to Warwick to study automotive engineering, which is
Hmm.
probably the reason why I'm on this podcast today, because
Yeah.
the automotive industry has been a passion of mine since I was a kid, and it's translated in every way from commercial cars to motorsport mainly, which is where I want to work in the future. So yeah, glad to be here.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
So now, today we're gonna talk about cars, like we said. I've liked cars ever since I was a kid. What's one of the biggest car experiences that you have, or one of the biggest car memories you have? What really got you into cars?
For me, honestly, the pivotal moment in my journey through what's made me want to join the automotive industry today is watching the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix. It was I think it was the first F1 race I saw on live television. It wasn't even an intentional find. I was just going through the channels one day because there was nothing really on, and I just saw this, and that was, to my luck, voted the best race of the decade, and that just happened to be the
Really?
first
Okay.
F1 race I ever saw.
Wow.
So I guess that's got me hooked on to F1 for the next 10 years, which is why I'm here today, and
Yeah.
hopefully for 10
Yeah.
more when I see myself working in the paddock someday.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, my intro to cars was very different. Fast and Furious. That's how I got into cars, just movies and stuff. And I had a Hot
Yeah,
Wheels
mine
collection,
too.
so I had a collection of 100 over 100 cars, all different kinds of cars and stuff from movies and stuff. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why I got into cars as well. Yeah. What about you, Ved?
Mine personally was video games and then the Fast and Furious franchise.
Oh
It was
yeah.
mainly Need for Speed and I think it was Asphalt. Yeah. But then eventually,
Yeah.
once I started watching the Fast and Furious movies, that really got me hooked on to cars in general.
Yeah. Honestly,
Also,
the biggest pop culture thing in car
yeah,
culture generally.
yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
Also, Hushrav,
Yeah,
you
you saw
have
the
an
latest one?
Instagram page, right, that teaches people more about motorsport?
Yeah, so I've recently started a page called Break It Down F1, which is just a pun
Oh,
on breaking things down,
yeah.
but
Mhm.
on
Yeah.
the car brakes on it, basically.
Yeah.
Which what I've realized in all my years is watching F1 especially is that it can get insanely complex, not just from a rule standpoint of view, but also from a technical standpoint, in the sense that there's just way too much going on in the cars nowadays, which is very
Mhm.
hard for the average consumer and the casual viewer to watch on TV and to grasp completely. So what this page sort of aims to do is basically just simplify everything down for people and sort of eliminate any burning questions someone might have after a race weekend has got over. So it's sort of like it's a post race weekend analysis of every big thing
Mhm.
that happened on that race weekend.
Oh wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recently got into F1, and I think it was like one of the biggest, most research-intensive things I had to do to actually understand
Yeah,
what's going on.
exactly.
Yeah, I went
Yeah.
through multiple
So,
YouTube videos, so that's great. We'll be linking that. Anyone who wants to get into F1 is currently into F1 and wants to learn more about it. Definitely check it out. They've got some great content down there.
yeah, we're gonna put his Instagram handle right there.
Yeah, cool then. So, cars. Um, Currently, I think when we think of a car, one of the most like iconic things that comes in my head, at least, like even when you close your eyes and imagine a car, is a sleek shape of a race car with the loudest engine you can possibly imagine, and just someone in the car sweating, with the wheel in their hand, driving intensely, shifting gears, pressing on the pedals, and that's one of the most exciting things ever. I think with cars and racing, just they're both interlinked in this way that it's almost inseparable, really. Yeah.
I mean,
So
yeah, for sure. Oh,
yeah.
like they say it's the best, arguably the best example of man connecting to machine. So
Hmm.
it's I would say the best sort of the best link a human can have to something he's created himself. And there's no better feeling, I would say, after recently getting to driving for that
Hmm.
matter,
Hmm,
than
hmm.
just having control of all those mechanical bits under you, around you, ahead of you, below you. So for sure, I think, yeah, that is what anyone would instantly think of when they think of driving.
Definitely. And now is one of the most exciting times in the automotive industry. I think we're going undergoing
Exactly.
one of the biggest shifts in terms of power, in terms of design, generally the way the industry works also, and the power shift as well. The automotive industry usually has been a very European thing, and today we see car makers like Tesla having the biggest market cap in the world, China being the biggest producer of automobiles, and it's definitely a very exciting and dynamic time to be in the automotive industry generally. Yeah. So let's quickly cover what cars are today, or what cars have been for the past couple of years. So I think one of the most important parts of any car, for that matter, is the heart, the engine.
Yeah.
Like by far the most important part of it. So let's get into how an engine really works, in a simplified manner.
Yeah.
So a car engine is an internal combustion engine, okay? And Ved, why don't you take us through what exactly that means, how exactly that works? What is
Yeah.
internal combustion
So,
essentially?
so far over like majority of like time, so far, so long as we've had cars, the inside of a car, the core component of a car is basically a piston. It works on a set of pistons laid out, and those pistons actually like produce the combustion that is needed to generate the power. So these pistons are located in cylinders in a row, and what basically happens is there are four main steps in how that combustion is created. There's the intake, the compression, combustion, and the exhaust. So what basically happens is during the first step, right, the intake, there's a valve, the intake valve, through which there's a mixture of air and fuel that's let in. And what this basically
Mm-hmm.
does is it comes through the valve and pushes the piston all the way down, right? And then in
Yeah.
the second step, in compression, the piston goes back up, and what this does is when it compresses that air fuel mixture to the top of the engine, that makes it more combustible, so that when it eventually lights on fire and it generates power, the power generated will be greater just because it gets compressed. Then at the
Yeah.
top, the spark plug, which is located near the top, right above the air fuel mixture, that generates a spark which ignites the mixture, and that basically sends the piston all the way down again. And this piston then generates that power and sends it to the crankshaft. And then finally, there's the fourth step, which is the exhaust, which is basically where the spent air fuel mixture is let out through the exhaust valve. And it's basically this series of four steps, just repeated over and over again, that is how the engine generates this power. And that causes the crankshaft to actually rotate, which actually leads to the term rotations per minute, revolutions per minute, RPM, right? And
Yeah.
the number of times that happens in a minute is how you measure the RPM of a car. And yeah, it's basically these four steps that really lead to the working of an engine.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's actually magical almost to imagine that just lighting fuel and air on fire in a small cylinder like that can somehow make a car go at these incredible speeds that we see cars going at today. Uh, the engine has definitely gone through a lot of sophisticated R&D and innovation over time for us to reach here. So really the way in that we can arrange these pistons around in engines, these pistons is just one aspect of it. A cylinder and a piston is just one aspect of an engine, which you can then configure in different ways to create different kinds of engines. I think most basic engine design is an inline engine where you have multiple cylinders put in all stacked up in a row, and they all work together to produce the kind of power that a car has. It's a very simple system. It's very easy to fix, very cheap. And in the starting, you used to have like an inline one engine, where it's only one cylinder producing a small amount of power. But as people wanted more power on cars to go faster and further distances, started adding more cylinders to it. So you made inline twos, inline fours, inline sixes, and the inline sixes and eights actually became very popular in the early days of cars to give them more power and give them more speed generally, because of having more cylinders created more horsepower. And that's the most basic engine design that you would see across a lot of cars. Another alternate design is a V engine design, which I think is more popular, and people have heard of V6 and V8 engines. Hushrav, why don't you take us through the V design?
Okay. So the way these design names come up, I mean, it's fairly obvious. It's just the shape in which the pistons and the cylinders are aligned. So an inline, as Saksham stated, are just all cylinders in one vertical line. Whereas a V arrangement would mean that the cylinders are equally distributed across two individual lines, which both cross to sort of form a V like this. And I would say, arguably, we hear the term V6, V8 a lot. And the reason we do is because naturally these are high displacement engines, which means they're found in most typically sports cars. And the reason they're found in sports cars is because a V arrangement, what it tends to do is it sort of compacts the space needed to fit a certain amount of cylinders. So they say it's very space efficient in the sense that you never hear really an inline 12 cylinder or an inline 10 cylinder, but you do hear of a V10 and a V12. It's only because a V cylinder arrangement can arguably fit the same amount of power but in half the space. So when you have the same amount of power in half the space, it means if you have the same space, you can have twice the power, which is why a V arrangement is just it's much more space efficient, and that space efficiency then gives rise to more scope to increase the power if need be. Which is why I think a V cylinder, because it obviously has a common crankshaft with the connecting rods, is just a much better alternative in a race car where you need to cut down on weight and you need to have as compact a packaging of the powertrain as you possibly can.
Yeah, so like if you take it back to again the inline engines, so back in the day when cars were just coming around, old performance cars used to have an inline 8 engine, which was super long. They had these huge hoods with these big exhausts on them, very noisy, very it's really not suited to get the most efficiency out of the engine. They were very loud, they were always clunky, breaking down, and they created stability problems. Oppose that to a V8 engine, which again has 8 cylinders, but it's in a V configuration, takes up much lesser space, is much more efficient, more stable, and because of that, you're able to get the same amount of power as an inline 8, but in a much shorter length as compared to an inline 8. That's why V8s have become such popular engines that you would hear about almost everywhere. Yeah, so I think one of the most iconic, some of the most iconic cars with V engines in the V8 would be muscle cars. I think American muscle cars have been huge in the popularization of the V8 engine. In fact, Fast and Furious, again as an example, has a large assortment of muscle cars that are all V8 fitted. and all have this amazing V8 throaty sound. And then you would have cars with V10s and V12s. So, for example, the Lamborghini Huracan has a V10 engine. Lambo's very special V10 engine that is so iconic over the years. And Lamborghini Aventador has a V12, and Aston Martins too have a V12 engine, which is just 12 cylinders packed together and just generating an enormous amount of power in a short amount of space. And then I think the most important part of this entire lineup of V engine is the V6 engine, which is the current F1 engine that they use. They used to use V10s and V8s before, but now they've transitioned to a V6 turbo hybrid. Hushrav, what does a V6 turbo hybrid mean? Like, how does that work in an F1 car?
Okay, so before I get to the turbo hybrids and the V6s, I think one important distinction to note in the lineup of the V engines, if we go from 6, 8, 10 to 12, arguably, I think 12 is the maximum you can realistically see on a production car at this point of time. And the difference between, I would say, the 6 and the 8, I would consider in one class, and 10 and the 12, I would consider in another class. And that's because the V6 and the V8s, you occasionally hear the term a supercharged or a turbocharged V6 or a turbocharged V8. But you don't quite hear the same terms with a V10 or a V12. And that's simply because when you have 10 cylinders or 12 cylinders, you're naturally occupying more space than a 6 or an 8 cylinder, which doesn't give you the same space for a turbocharger or a supercharger. So that's why the American muscle you talk about, which is synonymous with the V8, all come in those huge turbocharged V8s. And that's because the 6 and the 8 cylinders allow for that space for a turbocharger and a supercharger. So anyways, coming back to the F1 hybrids, the turbo hybrids. So the turbo hybrid era basically started around 2014. Before that, we had naturally aspirated, simple internal combustion V8s, straight pedal to the metal, that kind, just gasoline.
Whereas V10s before that.
Right? Yeah, and the V10s before that.
Consistently reduced the size.
Yeah, and the V12s even before the V10s.
Yeah, so, I think the V10 is the most iconic sound in an F1 car. It's got that screaming high-pitched sound. Fernando Alonso's 2002 championship car. Yeah, that sound. It's insane. Yeah. So back to V6.
Okay. So the V6s, the turbo hybrid V6s. So on the sound of it, on the face of it, not that impressive. A simple V6, 1.6 liters. I mean, the car I drive is a 1.5 liter. So on the face of it, I mean, you really think like, just numbers, not that impressive, right? I mean, it's the same layout as a Honda City, which is, except my Honda City doesn't lap the notch light at that kind of time, whereas an F1 car does. So you think, where does the power come from? And well, the power comes from the turbo hybrid system, which they've created. So at the base of it, an F1 car has what they call a turbocharged V6 engine. So all the characteristics of a normally aspirated V6 engine plus a turbocharger attached to it. So what does the turbocharger do in its most simplistic explanation, I would say? Feeds more oxygen to the engine. Why is oxygen good for the engine? I mean, basically more oxygen that goes to the engine, the better. Since these are internal combustion engines, combustion is just basically burning down a fuel using oxygen, which produces carbon dioxide and water. So more the oxygen, more the fuel burns. More the fuel burns, more the fuel into the pistons. More the fuel into the pistons, faster the pistons go, more the power. So basically, more oxygen through the engine is synonymous with more power. So that's the importance, firstly, of a turbocharger compared to what we call a naturally aspirated engine, which is no turbocharger, just straight up fuel in the piston, and that's it. The interesting part of, again, the turbocharged V6 is nothing new, well before 2014. So F1 didn't really do much there.
So basically, just interrupting you over here, basically a turbocharger essentially takes a normal V6 engine, which has X number of horsepower, and adds a bunch of horsepower on top of it.
To put in its simplistic form, obviously the actual mechanism is much more complex. You have a turbine, which basically sort of, you have air running in through the wastegate of your engine, which goes into the turbine. Then the turbine is connected to a compressor using this really long shaft. And when that compressor, basically it spins along with the turbine, and that sort of draws in extra air and then pushes that air into the engine. And then again, like I said, more air, more oxygen for the engine. It's just an engine with more power. But again,
so the air fuel mixture essentially gets more air,
precisely,
and then it's able to burn better.
Precisely.
Right.
So that's the perk of a turbocharger over a naturally aspirated engine. But the reason where F1 sort of made this technological leap was the introduction of the ERS or the ERS, which is the energy recovery system. Now, your energy recovery system mainly has two primary parts. You have the MGU-H and the MGU-K. So the MGU basically stands for motor generator unit. So we know what a motor is, we know what a generator is. And the H in MGU-H is motor generator unit heat, and the MGU-K is motor generator unit kinetic. Now here's what the two of them do. So you have the MGU-H, as the name suggests, heat. Now we need to backtrack many, many years to the first laws of thermodynamics. Y'all want to shoot? First law of thermodynamics?
Don't put me on the spot like that one.
It's the simplest one.
The energy conversion one. Conversation
precisely.
one. Yeah,
Yep.
conversation of
Yeah.
energy. Cool.
What does it say? Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So energy in one form has to go into an energy of another form. So the way MGU-H works is obviously this is a combustion process. A lot of heat is given out in the process. This heat has to come out somewhere. It isn't just all absorbed by the car, or it isn't just all lost. The energy has to be converted into some form. So that energy in the MGU-H is basically converted and sent to something known as the energy store. Now, this energy store, it's a store for energy. So with this MGU-H, the heat energy is converted into electrical energy. Now, this energy is then sent to the energy store where it's stored in a battery pack. Basically, the energy store is one big battery, and the MGU-H is its sort of charger, which uses your exhaust gases to sort of charge up that battery pack. Now, the interesting thing is the MGU-H has an unlimited harvest amount under the F1 regulations. So it can harvest as much as possible, like through the exhaust gases. But the energy it can deploy through it, connected through the energy store, is about 2 megajoules per lap. Now, you compare this to the MGU-K. Now, the MGU-K name suggests kinetic. Kinetic means speed. So naturally, this has got to do with something relating to the energy lost while moving. So the obvious way to recover energy in a really, really fast car would be when the car is braking. So when the car is losing a huge amount of speed, it means your kinetic energy is reducing, obviously getting converted into potential energy, but also that kinetic energy can be harvested through the wheels and through the brake pads into the MGU-K. And the thing with the MGU-K is it could be infinitely harvesting, but the regulations impose a cap of 2 megajoules per lap. But conversely, this can deploy 4 megajoules per lap compared to the 2 megajoules the MGU-H can deploy. So in a way, the MGU-K has a cap on how much it harvests, but the cap of how much it can spend is much more. And again, the same thing with the MGU-K, all the energy kinetic into mechanical and kinetic into electrical, which goes to the energy store. And then from the energy store, can be converted again into mechanical energy, which gives more power to the engine. So the interesting thing here is actually that the energy from the MGU-H can either be used to actually power the MGU-K or sent to the energy store. So naturally, you would send it to the energy store first off. But if, say, for example, often you've heard it, I think Charles Leclerc 2019 Bahrain, I think he had an MGU-H failure or an MGU-K failure. So when one of the systems fails, to ensure that basically a driver isn't rid of any electrical deployment, they can make those adjustments and see which system is harvesting more energy at a given amount of time. So it's useful. So occasionally on a cool down lap, you'll hear a race engineer of one of the drivers saying recharge on. So what recharge on really means is for the time the recharge button is on, it'll basically tell the car to go into full energy conservation mode. So the MGU-K and the MGU-H, all they'll be doing is just harvesting energy because it's a cool down lap. You don't need to go fast. You don't need all out performance. And then they recharge the batteries and then they go for a push lap again. So
that's able to give you more boost really. You can
it's able to give you more power. Exactly. And it's not power that can really be joked. Yeah, it's not a small amount of power. Like you'd think it'd be like a boost button, but in reality, it's much more than a boost button because it's not a 4 or 5 second hyper boost. Around most laps, your energy deployment works for around 30 seconds a lap. And 30 seconds a lap around most tracks is 1/3 a lap, which means if you're lacking that energy deployment through any part of the lap, it is going to cost you time in sport like Formula One, where you have first place to 20th place covered by 1.5 second over 130 second, over 100-second lap time. Every 10th matters. So anytime you don't have your energy deployment on the right setting, you are going to lose out. So that's what makes this so important, I think, the MGUH and the MGUK system, which
Yeah.
F1 in a way has yet not fully developed, given they constantly have minor tweaks to the development and to the regulations they impose each year. And obviously, the natural downside to the system is that it is ridiculously expensive. And I mean
Yeah.
expensive to the point where just developing or just building a PU from ground up, like say I gave you the tools and I gave you a Lego instruction manual on how you build a Formula One power unit. Even then, if you had every assembly part in place, it would yet run you into millions of dollars. And we're talking millions of dollars here compared to you can get a really nice hypercar. Well, you can get a few nice hypercars at the cost of just building a Formula One power unit.
Yeah, just the
So
first one. Like, that's
yeah,
devoid
exactly.
of testing, prototyping, the 3
Exactly.
engines you require across the season. Yeah, it's incredibly
Exactly.
complicated to build. But you know what? Actually, in a way, it also shows just how much you can do with a V6 engine. I mean, Formula
Exactly.
One's really squeezing every bit of power they can out of a V6 engine, and creating some of the fastest cars in the world. I mean, cars have only gotten faster over time, despite reducing
Yeah.
size of the engine. So, despite coming from a V10 or a V8 to a V6,
Exactly.
the turbo hybrid system has been able to make it much more powerful and much more quicker engine overall. Yeah. Wow. I mean, it really goes to show how innovative motorsport is.
Yeah, it is. It is an
Yeah.
engineering marvel. I mean, when we sort of we talk about engines in Formula One, we know if anyone watches Formula One, you know Mercedes has arguably had the
Hmm.
most dominant power units since the turbo hybrid era. But
Hmm.
you think, what does a dominant power unit mean? Obviously, an outright horsepower advantage, but it's not like they just have a better set of instructions or a better set of tools than everyone else. What the way one engine is better than the other, you have literally an infinite amount of ways you can make an engine better than the other. And I think the way Mercedes has excelled in this region is the way they pack the engine. And by pack the engine, I mean how they've sort of designed their car around the engine, and how, in a way, as the cars have developed over the seasons, how they've accordingly tweaked the engine around the car. So how they've aligned each part of the engine to be as compact as possible, because remember, compactness in the engine means more space for aerodynamic development around the car. Because remember, just a good engine does not win you races. Case in point, 2019 Ferrari. You do need aero, you do need that scope for tech developments happening on the exterior of the car. And I think Mercedes has just done such a good job of creating a compact power unit that it's given them so much scope for expansion in every other area over all these years, which is why they've been such a dominant force in Formula One all these years.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, Mercedes has really had some truly groundbreaking innovation, especially in the engine section, across the turbo hybrid era. That's kept them on top. But that looks to be changing this season.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes with the Red Bull. But yeah, anyway, moving on now. To other
So
kinds
we
of
actually-
engines. I mean, V is the most popular, but there
Yeah.
have also been other different kinds of engines that have
Yeah.
been incredibly useful in car development over time.
Right. Because we have the inline, which was the most simple one and the cheapest one, and the V engine is one of the best. But then we have a few more, and a trend that you see in like the naming of these engines is that they're usually named after the shape that the cylinders take, right? So again, like Hushrav said, the inline has cylinders in a line. The V engines have cylinders arranged like attached to the same crankshaft and in a V shape. So continuing with this, we have a few more, and so one of them is the Boxer, or it's also called the flat engine, and like the name suggests, it's
Yeah.
completely flat, right? So you have the crankshaft, and you have two cylinders on each side, like two rows of cylinders, and they actually stick out at what is approximately a 180-degree angle, as opposed to the acute angle you'd have in a V engine. And
Yeah.
what this does is it makes it efficient because there's so much space for each set of cylinders that the intake and exhaust is taken care of really well, because they have enough like space to deal with all of that. And this makes for really good handling in the car. And you can see some examples of these in cars, like the Volkswagen Beetle used a flat four, where you actually have like four cylinders sticking out, and the Porsche 911 also
Yeah, one
used.
of my favorite cars.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
quite iconic.
the
Yeah.
the Porsche handling is a result of the flat six engine. I mean, the magical way that the Porsche handle around track is because of the engine that they had since the beginning, and they've constantly been tweaking and slightly improving every generation to reach where it's at now. But yeah, go
Yeah.
on.
And then, yeah, so you have the flat engines, but you also have the W engines. And the way the W engines actually formed is by combining two sets of what look like V engines, right? And you get the W or the double V actually formation. And so this means they actually have 3 or 4 cylinders or sets of cylinders on the same crankshaft, which means they're all really just stuffed in terms of like space. They're pretty crowded. And you see examples of these with the W12 on like Bentleys. Bentleys use W12s a lot, or the Bugatti Chiron uses W16. Um,
Yeah, absolutely
yeah.
massive
So
engine. In fact,
yeah.
if you consider it, like even the W16 engine, which is like two V8s glued together, to reach 300 miles per hour, the Chiron required 4 turbochargers, and I think 1500 horsepower. So
Yeah.
the Chiron is really, I think, just a ton of power packed into a small car that lets it go that fast in the first place.
But I think
Hmm.
even then, I would say among all the engines, the Bugatti Veyron, for example, which is, I would say, the name you associate instantly when you think of the world's fastest car in the world. Although
Oh
I
yeah.
would think I think it's not even in the top 5 or top 10 anymore. But
Hmm.
nonetheless, it's what everyone's sort of known as the fast car. I think the Veyron is the best example of a W16. I think it was one of the first cars with a W16,
Hmm.
and the reason the Veyron was as good as it was not light by any stretch. It was not a good race car. It was an awful car
Hmm.
around the track. It had horrible handling, was far too heavy. The balance was all over the place. But the reason the Veyron was just so good at the top end of its acceleration was just the sheer grunt from a W16. I don't think, as
Yeah.
far as my knowledge goes, the Veyron was turbocharged or supercharged. It was just the
Hmm.
fact that there were literally 16 cylinders pushing that car
All
ahead
firing at the
that
same time.
made the
Yeah.
Veyron
Yeah.
so potent in a straight line.
Definitely, definitely. In fact, I mean, talking about speed records now that we're, we're getting into it, it's actually incredible. The McLaren F1, which I think is one of the best supercars of all time, iconic car from the 90s, is still, I found this out recently because I didn't know about this, but is still the fastest naturally aspirated car of all time, I think. I think that's a record. I'm not fully sure. But I think that's what I heard the other day, and it really shows you that beyond the 90s, to push a car to achieve the fastest speed in the world, they have to have other things apart from the engine. They have to have some kind of a electrical system like Formula One, or have turbochargers slapped onto the engine to be able to give it the push required to reach there. And the McLaren F1 was the last example of a car that did the world record speed without any external help, with only the engine in its bay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And also, moving on, like back to engines. The last engine that we have right now is actually really different when you look at the rest, because the rest they came in different shapes, right? You had inline, you had VW, boxer, but the thing with all of them is they had the cylinders arranged in rows, and then those rows themselves are arranged in shapes. But the last type of engine we have now, which is the rotary or Wankel engine, doesn't actually use cylinders. It sort of uses
Yeah.
a triangular rotor. It's like this big triangular rotor with like rounded sides that spins like in place, and that one rotor alone does the same four-stroke thing, right? The same four-stroke process that the pistons did in the other
Yeah.
engines. Carries
The
out that
intake,
same process
compression,
on its own.
combustion, and exhaust.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It does that all on its own. And like with the cylinders, where you can stack several of them, you can have your one rotor and then stack several of them to make like maybe a 6 rotor
A four
Wankel
rotor,
engine.
six rotor,
Yeah,
eight rotor.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can stack on them. Some are even going
It's
up to like
often called
12,
the
right?
Dorito engine or a spin Dorito
Yeah,
engine because the triangular shape is like a Dorito.
yeah,
Uh, yeah,
yeah,
incredibly
and
popular with Mazda cars actually.
yeah,
Back in the early 2000s, I think the Mazda cars had the rotary Wankel engine, and it became some of the most popular modding cars in America, where people bought the car and then did extensive modifications on top of the vehicle engine because of how easy it was to use and break together and build it back together. People often experimented at their own home and made the fastest Mazda car they could possibly make. But yeah.
Yeah. But those
So
are
moving on, and
basically
no matter how good an engine
engines.
is, yeah, no matter how good an engine is, I think the overall package of how a car works, essentially the technical working of it, is called the powertrain, where it's the axle, the wheels, the engine, and how they're powered. All that together in a car is called the powertrain, and an integral part of that is which four wheels are powered, or which two wheels of all four wheels are powered in a car. And that becomes very, very important when you're considering building a car to power it in the right way for its suited purpose. So, for example, a race car would have a different power profile as compared to a normal sedan that you see around the streets, as compared to a truck or a Jeep, let's say. And an important aspect in that is whether it's front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, or all wheel drive. So yeah, let's start with front wheel drive, which is the most common thing that we see in cars today. So yeah, Ved, why don't you take us through front wheel drive?
Yeah, so like Sashram said, it's extremely common. So most cars on the road today utilize a front wheel drive, and this is because it's extremely economical. It's pretty cheap, and it helps the manufacturers in terms of things like it's very, like it's cost effective basically. So a front wheel drive, like the name suggests, is where the power is given to the two front wheels, right? And they assist in the motion of the car, the movement of the car. And the reason it's really common, apart from being cost effective, is it's really good for like common road use, right? Because it has a really good grip when you're driving in the rain, or even the weight of the engine, right? It balances it really well between the wheels, like near the front of the car.
Yeah, because it's in
So
the front
there's
of the car, you get that grip that the wheels that are powered actually stuck onto the road, and because of that, in snow and rain and stuff, it makes for good like everyday vehicles that people would buy.
Yeah, so it's really good for
Yeah.
like common vehicles that you see on the road every day. For people who are just driving it as a means of transport and need something that works, right? So yeah, again, it works well in the rain. It works well with the weight of the engine. There is one aspect, however, that doesn't work that well, and that's the handling, right? Because when you have when you have a car, right, it's a front wheel drive, it tends to understeer a lot, and that isn't ideal. But again,
Oh yeah,
because
wait,
of the other,
that's a car term. That's a car term. Wait.
Okay.
Let's quickly go through understeer oversteer.
Yeah,
Hushrav, yeah.
I think
What's understeer?
the
What's
best
oversteer?
the best way anyone could explain understeer, oversteer is understeer is when the front axle loses grip. So when you're turning in and the car just simply isn't turning in as much as you want it to. So
Yeah.
your front tires are the ones that are losing grip and not giving you the response you want. So you're yet going right. Say, for example, I want to go right. You're yet going right. You're just not going right as much as you want to. In a road car, typically, it does not make that big of a difference. But
Yeah.
understeer in a race car at 200 kmph through a fifth gear corner is a scary experience. Whereas oversteer is the exact polar opposite. Oversteer is when your
Yeah.
rear wheels are losing grip. So we call it loss of traction. Basically, oversteer is a consequence of a loss of traction. So it's when the most common term to describe it is a drift. That's how you
Yeah.
drift.
Drifting is basically oversteer.
Yeah, it's basically drifting is controlled oversteer
Controlled
is what they
oversteer.
try to call it. So oversteer is when the rear tires will slip up and lose traction with the road, and that causes the rear axle and the rear end of the car to step out. So
Yeah.
there are both phenomenons that happen at the opposite end of the car. And the scary part is in racing cars, occasionally they can happen simultaneously through a corner. So you often hear drivers complaining, at the entry of the corner, I'm having understeer. And at the exit, I'm having oversteer, which means at the entry of the corner, when he's turning in, the front of the car isn't biting the way he wants it to. It's not giving him the initial turn in that he needs from the car. Whereas at the exit, by the time he hits the apex and he's at the exit, he's got too much purchase from the car, in the sense that the rear of the car is moving much faster than the front of the car is, which is where he's now having
That's making it
oversteer, and
spin
now
out.
the rear end. Yeah, that's making the rear end step out. So that's what they call the balance. Occasionally you hear drivers saying, I'm very unhappy with the balance of the car. It means that he's just not got that balance between whether he wants an understeery car or an oversteery car yet. Each car has a natural understeer or oversteer associated with it.
Yeah.
And having both of them happen at the same time is not the best thing. And occasionally it's just the very best of the best drivers who can nail that balance race weekend in, race weekend out. So that's basically understeer and oversteer.
Yeah, and front wheel drive cars typically tend to understeer. Typically, I mean, it's different for every car. As Hushrav said, each car has a different profile for understeering and oversteering. But front wheel drive cars are prone to understeer, which takes us to the exact opposite now, rear wheel drive, where the power is given to the rear wheels. So this is actually a much older way of making cars. Really, the original cars, they were made with rear wheel drive, and it's not as common today. Today, very few cars that you will see out in the world are rear wheel drive cars, and they're mostly reserved for performance cars, sports cars, and race cars technically. So because of that, you won't see rear wheel drive as much these days. But basically, the way it works is typically engines again are in the front of most of these sports cars, like a Corvette or a Dodge, and there is a transmission line that connects the engine and feeds power to the back wheels. Because of that, rear wheel drive tends to be more complicated than front wheel drive. Again, a reason why it's not there in a lot of normal cars that you see these days. And because of the complications, also it costs more. However, in motorsport, you will still see majority of the cars being rear-wheel drive. You'll still see F1 cars rear-wheel drive, and you see that's because when you move a car at a high speed, at 200 miles per hour, the weight of the car naturally shifts backwards, and because of that, if a car is rear-wheel drive and it's moving fast and the weight moves backwards, you get more traction from the rear wheels, and because of that, you're able to achieve higher speeds in motorsport, and that's why rear-wheel drive is very popular in motorsport. And another reason why it actually lost popularity with normal road cars was because of how easy it was to spin and drift. So, as opposed to front-wheel drive cars, rear-wheel drive cars are very prone to oversteer. And because of oversteer, often if you aren't an experienced driver and you don't know what's happening, you tend to lose control and spin out, which can be very dangerous in a road scenario, obviously. And because of that, people also didn't like rear-wheel drive cars as much. Front-wheel drive cars are much easier to correct. Understeer you can easily correct by just turning more. But if you have a lot of oversteer and you spin out, there's very little you can do to correct it. The Porsche 911 is one of the biggest examples of a rear-wheel drive car that still exists today. And back in the 70s, the 911s were called widowmakers because of how many drivers actually lost their lives in a rear-wheel drive car because they lost control and they spun out, they went off cliffs and etc. etc. Today, rear-wheel drive cars are McLarens. You'll see a lot of McLarens rear-wheel drive, and most muscle cars like the Dodge Challenger, Charger, Mustang are typically rear-wheel drive cars, and you see them on drag strips going extremely fast because the rear wheels are able to give that kind of power to them. However, yeah.
I mean, the caveat, of course, having a rear-wheel drive car is the what people term driver's cars, in the sense that, like you said, they're not designed. I mean, they are designed, of course, but they're not supposed to be the commercial office car or the typical Sunday drive car. Most rear-wheel drive cars were designed for that fun aspect. So they were designed to go onto the track, kick out a drift, or maybe smash it down a quarter-mile track strip. So in that way, I think, in my opinion at least, and maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned when I say this, but I think nothing will replace the ethos of a rear-wheel drive car.
100%.
Because we can have all the gizmos. We can have torque vectoring, which will come to an all-wheel drive. We can have dynamic suspension. We can have all of that, but nothing will replace that slip of traction you get when a rear-wheel drive car goes.
You throw it in a corner and it just spins.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a great feeling. And you mentioned torque vectoring, so let's get into all-wheel drive now. All-wheel drive is like the big dominant form that's taking over these days. So, Hushrav, what's all-wheel drive? How does all-wheel drive work?
Okay, so we had front-wheel drive, power to the front. We've had rear-wheel drive, power to the rear. All-wheel drive. Simple. Just power to all wheels. Now, the way all-wheel drive works is basically, of course, power to all wheels. But the reason it's potent, it's good is, of course, the one scenario you can really imagine it being good in is off-road. Now, why is it good in off-road? Because off-road, the roads are uneven. You're not going to ever have a smooth surface, which occasionally means more than once you're going to have a car on just 3 wheels and not 4, which would be trouble, say, in a front wheel car. If you just had 3 wheels, say one of your front wheels was on an incline and was elevated. Now suddenly you have an uneven power delivery, which means you have power only coming from your front left wheel, for example. That's what an all-wheel drive car aims to fix. So when you land yourself up into a sticky scenario, when you do need power from your other wheel, say you're beached front or back, that's what the all-wheel drive car fixes. It gives you power across all the remaining wheels. And now the way all-wheel drive cars have...
One second. A lot of Range Rovers, Land Rover, Jeeps that you'd see, military vehicles are typically all-wheel drive. Because they go through tough terrain where grip isn't there, and you gotta somehow find grip on those surfaces like rocks and mud and marshes. That's only possible through an all-wheel drive car. Yeah,
exactly. And of course, the balance of the all-wheel drive car sort of falls neutrally between being naturally understeery or being naturally oversteery. That being said, it's not like they don't understeer or oversteer at all. Again, each car does have its individual steering profile, which an all-wheel drive car will, depending on the manufacturer and depending like even what suspension modes you're on. But they tend to not be as understeery as front-wheel cars, and they tend to be not as oversteery as rear-wheel drive cars, if that makes sense. They fall into the sort of midland between the two. And one of the most, I would say, impressive, interesting sort of developments in the all-wheel drive area since it's been introduced to the commercial industry has to be torque vectoring. Torque is basically the common way to explain torque is just power. It's rotations. That's what you can explain torque as. To the most.
It's the amount of rotational power really the wheel has.
Exactly.
Like how much of ground it can push back in one spin.
So torque vectoring now, vectors, physics term, vector is just direction. So torque vectoring. So what it's really telling you is that you have your 4 wheels, right? Occasionally around the corner, you might, in a standard car, in a standard all-wheel drive car, you might have equal amounts of power coming from all 4 wheels at that given time. But now what torque vectoring does is, say you're moving right. When you're moving right, it's going to give the left side axle, so your front left and your front right, that much more power compared to the inside line, which is the front right and the front left, and the rear left. And the reason torque vectoring helps is because it connects to, so basically it sort of adjust the way your axle is reacting dynamically. The important part is dynamically. You can have an axle react differently. You can have a front axle react differently to a rear axle, and you can have a front left react differently to a front right. But most of those changes are permanent. What makes torque vectoring unique is that it's something that happens dynamically. It's something that happens it's something that adapts itself to each given scenario. It's not like the example I gave only works for right-handed corners. Torque vectoring, conversely, will instantly switch to the other side when you're going left. And this connects to a whole other region, which is, it's obviously there in road cars, but we don't really tinker around or mess with it much, which is the differential. Your differential is basically how much power are you really, not how much, but in what way is your power going to the wheels? So you have 2 things in the differential. You have an open differential or an unlocked differential, or you have a closed differential, or what we call a locked differential. Now, these aren't 2 extremes. It's not that it can only be open or only be closed. It's like a sliding scale. So you can have more open setups and you can have more closed setups. Now, what an open differential setup will do is basically, it won't give you the same outright advantage in traction, but it'll allow for a gradual loss in traction. So you'll feel when the car is going from underneath you. And this is useful in race cars, where this gradual loss in traction, it compensates very highly in tire wear. So you have really low tire wear when you're running an open differential setup. Whereas a locked differential setup will transmit the power, the power in the wheels will be transmitted equally along both sides, which means that the instant advantage you'll have in traction is really, really good. But obviously, since all the power is coming right through equally on both sides, you're going to have consequently much higher tire wear because you're just asking that much more out of the tires. So this is one huge element of race car setups. How much differential are you running? And it's not something that's in a race car through the full season. It varies track to track. Now, if you had a track with
Even corner
low
to
speed
corner, really.
corners, exactly.
Yeah.
The instant example when you say corner to corner is Michael Schumacher. Michael Schumacher had a habit of adjusting his differential on the fly through his steering wheel each corner he went by, because he just needed different amounts of purchase from his rear wheels through each corner. Most drivers don't touch it. Most drivers, and in fact, most F1 cars nowadays have sort of auto differentials, in the sense that the car knows where you're at on the track, and a bunch of computers will make that differential setting for you. But they do vary track to track, and differential settings are a huge component of how a Formula One car goes through its setup every weekend. So that's basically a sort of subset of torque vectoring. And mainly one disadvantage why you don't find all-wheel drive in motorsport particularly is because remember, these are you're giving power to wheels, right? And when you're giving power to wheels, obviously you've got to have a bunch of mechanisms that allow that power to be delivered. More mechanisms means more mechanical parts. More mechanical parts means more weight. And obviously weight is the enemy in motorsport. You want anything on your car but extra weight, which is why they prefer rear-wheel drive cars. And also the advantage of a rear-wheel drive car, again, is it's where I think the driver feels at most at one with his car, because he can feel the car going from behind him. He can feel the way the car is reacting best in a rear-wheel drive car. In a way, an all-wheel drive car is a bit too tame. It's a bit too in control for racing drivers like him, which is why all-wheel drive cars aren't particularly that famous in motorsport, at least.
Yeah, you won't find them as much. In fact, the fact that it's so complicated and you require all this additional stuff to make it work increase the cost again. And that's why you will rarely ever find all-wheel drive cars, even in like everyone's general car, commercial daily car usage. And that's why all-wheel drive isn't that popular. But because of how good it is in racing and how good makes handling and power delivery, some 911s are now all-wheel drive. 911 has historically been a rear-wheel drive car, has now switched to all-wheel drive. Cars like the Lamborghini Aventador, Ferrari SF90, again all-wheel drive cars. So I mean, it remains to be seen if all-wheel drive can achieve the same kind of success and popularity that rear-wheel drive cars have in motorsport over time. Maybe through innovation. Maybe it becomes simple and light enough that F1 can one day run an all-wheel drive car. But yeah. So as Hushrav said before, and this perfectly segues into our next topic of discussion, is car design. So like Hushrav said, in an F1 car, engine is just one aspect of it. Even if you have the best engine, the most power in an engine in the entire F1 paddock, or any car for that matter, you can't really be the fastest unless your car is designed according to the purpose of the car. So for the longest time ever, designs were based on looks, which is not a bad thing. I mean, we've seen some beautiful, beautiful cars. And some great designers who've made some of the best looking cars of all time. And those have become iconic in their own right, and because of the way they look. And the Jaguar E-Type comes to mind, the DeLorean comes to mind, the Lamborghini Countach comes to mind, the Mirai. These are all really iconic designs that have been more influenced by looks rather than function, really. However, we see a greater trend these days where cars are influenced by function. Cars are designed in a certain way to make them better at performance, and that also translates into good looks. The teardrop shape is the biggest example that comes to my mind with the McLaren cars. Even though they're the most aerodynamic and the best, most slippery cars ever, they also look beautiful. And that's the gradual change that we've seen in the design language of cars over time. And we want to talk about that for a bit over here. I think for the longest time, like from the 50s, 60s onwards, aerodynamics have been like a big topic of discussion in motorsport, in regular cars as well. And most car designs have been focused around aerodynamic advantages that you can have from a car. So I think in the starting, it was more about car versus wind. It was more about making sure your car slips through the wind in the best way possible. And everyone tried to build the sleekest car possible with the lowest drag coefficient. Now, again, technical term, Hushrav was drag coefficient.
Okay. So before we move on to drag coefficients, that's this quote by Enzo Ferrari, of course, founder of Ferrari. Aerodynamics are for people who can't build engines. It's one part of his
Colin Chapman would disagree.
Yeah, it's one part of his philosophy I really disagree with, because I think an engine an engine is, of course, there's innovation that goes on in an engine. It always will, but at the end of the day, an engine is, it's mechanical. It's very sort of earthy in the way it's made. Aerodynamics really, they push creativity, they push innovation to like something you can't get anywhere else, I think, in the automotive industry. So, okay, let's talk about drag coefficients. Okay,
Yes.
what are drag coefficients? So, when anything moves through air, it has a certain amount of resistance experienced by the air. You can think of it in two ways. You can think of it as the air standing still and the car breaking through the air. Or the way wind tunnels work, you have a car standing still and you have air pushing against the car. So you have the air moving. Obviously, more the resistance to something, the slower it's going to go through that certain fluid. So what they do by trying to make these cars as sort of smooth and as less boxy as possible is they try to reduce the coefficient of drag. Now, in the automotive industry, this is termed as the CD rating, the coefficient of drag rating. And the lower your CD rating, the more you can say aerodynamically efficient your car is. And
the
now
more it can slip through air.
Exactly. Now, why you think, why is this important? Of course, the sort of consequence which everyone sees, as Saksham said, is they look very nice. Smooth cars look really, really aesthetically pleasing. But then again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I think not everyone would agree with me on that point. But nonetheless, it's what I think. However, the main reason I think we've become so fixated on having slippery cars is efficiency. And you ask efficiency in how, in what kind? So when you have, say you need to achieve a speed of 100 miles an hour, for example, you have a car, the car achieves 100 miles per hour. Now, you make the car in whatever way, you make a few design changes and you make the car aerodynamically more efficient. Now, the car is going to basically glide through the air easier, which means it's going to reach, with the same amount of power, it's going to reach 100 miles per hour much quicker and much easier. And by easier, I mean it's not going to put that much of a strain on the engine, on the powertrain, basically. And what this obviously sort of goes into is the fact that you don't need to burn as much fuel to get from point A to point B. If your car just accelerates easier, if the car can maintain a speed easier, because of just how much less resistance it's experiencing. That is obviously a great thing. And why that's a great thing is, of course, one, it's brilliant for the environment. There's, in the case of ICEs, there's lesser fossil fuels being burned in going from point A to point B. But it's also good because it consequently helps car makers show a very high average, like a miles per gallon average, which makes their cars look very economically efficient on the fuel side of it. And of course, exactly. And I think the reason, I don't think that fixation has yet come in the commercial, the standard internal combustion industry. I don't think we're yet that obsessed with aerodynamics, although we do see a trend going, we do see cars are getting sleeker. I think the main obsession with commercial car aero is coming from the electric industry, because the electric industry, their full mission is to be as efficient as possible. And the best way I think you can optimize electric vehicles from a design standpoint is by making them slippery in a straight line. And that's the best way.
I mean, if you see that all the Teslas, they all have that same very sleek shape. So the Porsche Taycan.
In fact, just very recently, I was reading up the Model S Plaid, a car we will talk about later on. The Model S Plaid was given a CD rating of 0.208, which rounds off to 0.21. Which makes it only second place to my favorite car, the Mercedes EQS, which is a 0.20. But again, the common denominator, both these vehicles, fully electric vehicles, which naturally you wonder is the reason why their designers are pushing them to be as sleek, as aerodynamically buttery as possible, which is what's giving them not just extra performance. Mind you, these are both performance vehicles, so they're not really chasing all out green efficiency, but they're chasing speed efficiency. How can you get, for these cars, it's how can you get from 0 to 200 miles per hour the fastest way possible. So that's
Also a
what these
range,
cars are changing.
also a range
Exactly.
question really, because
Yeah, so
the
range.
slippier your electric car is, the further it can go essentially.
Exactly. So range will come into the philosophy. I don't think range really, although the Model S Plaid boasts a brilliant range. Again, more to come
Yeah.
on this car later, but it boasts of a brilliant range. But I don't think they've really gone for range on the Model S because what they've really tried to do, they call it the fastest production car ever. And I think the reason for its aerodynamic brilliance is the fact that they've just chased performance.
Yeah,
And that has really
definitely.
paid off dividends, not just in the performance department, not just in efficiency, but also in looks. I mean, it's a beautiful looking
It's a
car.
beautiful car.
Given Tesla
Yeah.
generally tends to stick to very similar looking designs over the years, most Teslas look very similar from the front end. The Model S Plaid
Yeah.
is really eye-catching in that way, which makes it a really
Different.
interesting car to look at.
100%. Yeah. Just to give you an idea of like other cars drag coefficients, a Mercedes A-Class is 0.22, and like a Hummer, a really boxy Hummer H2 is 0.57. And that really goes to show the sharp edges aren't really ideal for aerodynamics. It's more you want rounded edges, you want that slippery teardrop, almost teardrop like
One
shape.
that's smoother, sleeker one look that's really like,
Yeah.
good aerodynamically.
So everything Hushrav talked about was the first essentially iteration of aerodynamics. Was the first way to look at it. If my car is slipperier, it goes faster, it goes longer, it better for engine efficiency, etc., etc. A real turning point over here is when we started thinking of the air as sort of a friend of the car. We started using the air to make our cars better. And I think Colin Chapman, who was the founder of Lotus, was one of the most innovative people in this area. And he said that he thought about planes and their wings and thought, what if we flip the wing and essentially use those wings to then make our cars stick to the ground? And that's how downforce was essentially born in F1 as well, where you had these giant wings they put on cars, front wings and rear wings, which are now staple in F1 cars, but back then were revolutionary. Essentially what these wings do is that the air passing over them, these wings direct the air to stick the car to the ground. If a car sticks to the ground, you have better traction, better power delivery on the ground, and you also have better handling for corners. And the cars, when they stick to the ground, are able to handle much better in the corners. And aerodynamics and downforce was essentially a huge game changer for F1. It made cars way faster, cars way more nimble. And this essentially philosophy change of using the air to our advantage also changed aerodynamics forever in cars. And you see spoilers and you see wings in cars these days, and that's essentially the purpose that these serve in using the air in a way to help us do better. However, there's a bit of a downside to this, which is that when you have a big wing at the back of a car, it also creates additional drag, which is the exact opposite of what you want. So you have to sort of find a balance in it. Another very cool thing that has been able to bond. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but you stated how obviously it creates a consequence on the wing behind. And we started this full discussion off with Colin Chapman, who is like arguably, I would say, the greatest automotive engineer to exist in the Formula One industry.
Yeah.
But he created, of course, the concept of downforce. But what Colin Chapman also created a few years later was the concept of ground effect. Ground effect was really interesting in the sense that it sort of it undid all of Chapman's work early on. So he created the concept of these complex wings and these huge barge boards and all of that. And what ground effect did was basically say that, okay, we know how we can generate downforce through these wings and through these barge boards and everything. Now let's try doing it through airflow underneath the car. Which is why what Colin Chapman did was he exploited how air flows around the skirts of the car and around the underfloor of the car. And the reason it's called ground effect is basically it takes the air flowing under the car, so the air between the ground and the floor of the car, to be a sort of part of the aerodynamic system which you're dealing with, which is why it was called ground effect. And of course, the consequence of ground effect was, again, more downforce. And the reason it was sort of banned at one point was literally because cars got too grippy, like far too grippy, in the sense that the amount of downforce they were generating was so ridiculous. Downforce to a certain point is also sticking down, but what ground effect was doing was it was sucking things up because of how strong it was.
One second, I'll just interrupt you quickly over here for a second. Just to like give a brief idea of what ground force is from a technical standpoint. Ved, why don't you take us through what ground force, like how it actually works, and why it's different from typical wing as downforce.
Yeah, so as Akshay mentioned earlier, actually, like with downforce, right? you have this side effect, which is drag. And drag is very terrible for the car because one, it actually reduces the maximum speed that the car can go at. And two, it also it lets out sort of, I think you can think of it as dirty air, but basically it lets out this turbulent air from the back, which is actually really harmful and a huge obstacle to cars that are behind you, right? Cars that are actually really close, like maybe two car lengths behind you. It, it reduces their downforce a lot too, maybe as much as like almost by half. And
Yeah.
this is a huge problem, right? For both cars actually. So then you can utilize what's called the ground effect to sort of like counter this. So to sort of like get the benefits of downforce without actually having to deal with drag. And the ground effect actually works on the Venturi principle, which is I'll explain it. So basically, if you have a tube, right, or any sort of passage of air where air molecules flow, the air molecules in one end will enter at the same rate that they leave on the other end, right? Which sort of makes this constant flow of particles. But if at any point, like say the middle of the tube, you sort of restrict the size or the width of the tube, right?
Yeah.
There's a smaller amount of space through which the particles can go through, but they have to go through it in the same like number. So what ends up happening is they go a lot faster. So you actually do this like as Hushrav said, between the floor of the car and the ground, is you actually limit the space over there, so the air sort of moves faster. What this does is it creates this sort of low pressure area near the bottom of the car, which in turn creates a high pressure area towards the top of the car, and this basically creates sort of vacuum or suction region where the air can move really fast, and this presses the car down, creating this alternative drag downforce without involving any sort of drag. So that's why the ground effect is really cool that way, in which it takes all benefits of adding wings and like the reverse, the inverted plane wings and the spoilers in the back of the car. It gives you all the advantages of using that sort of a system, and that gives you the downforce that you need, but it gets rid of all the drag that comes along with it.
I mean, yeah, I think ground effect is a really, really, really beautiful real life example of Bernoulli's principle. I mean, it is, I would say, Bernoulli's principle at its technological finest, in the sense, again, like Bernoulli's principle is exactly what Ved explained. It's basically an increase in the speed of the fluid that occurs because you sort of decrease the pressure, or you decrease the potential energy of the fluid going through it. So the best way to explain it is you take a tarpaulin on a windy day, and you sort of put it outside, and the top is naturally going to submerge because of the air. But when it submerges, the space between the ground and the base of the top is decreasing. But as the space keeps decreasing, the air under the top is going to flow that much faster from under the top. And that's what, as Ved said, is what ground effect exploited. Ground effect was created to make air flow around and under the car much faster in a more centralized fashion. So I think, that's what makes ground effect.
And it was banned in F1 actually. It was very controversially banned. Why was it banned, Hushrav? What could possibly be wrong with ground effect?
Okay, so obviously, the reason ground effect came into existence was because Colin Chapman, who was founder of Lotus, had arguably a lot of funds to dispose of, and he had a full team working at UC Berkeley simultaneously to research into ground effect and bring it to his cars. And when it came in, the advantage it gave was so ridiculously superior that the Lotus cars became dominant. And in F1, it's either if you can't innovate something to match it, then you copy what the innovation was. And obviously other teams try to copy it, but you see, these are design philosophies. They can't exactly be copied as simply, so you yet have to work it around your car, which means a lot of R&D from your end, and at that point not a lot of F1 teams had that kind of money. They were mostly operating out of small garages and small work sheds, so no one really had that kind of funding, and they were really sort of, Williams was so Lotus was so dominant that they were sort of killing the competition really, which the FIA thought, okay, if this is what's ruining the spectacle, and I think we need to call it quits on ground effect. And also, ground effect also to a certain point became too dangerous because, like I said, not only was it sticking the cars down, but it was also sucking a lot up from underneath, to a point where they were on street circuits. They were uprooting trains while they were going forwards, which
Yeah.
is really, really dangerous because you might
Yeah.
think of an uprooted drain as not much, but an uprooted drain at 200 km, a metal uprooted drain at 200 kmph slamming against the underside of
Yeah,
the
it's
car
a
is
it's a
Yeah.
problem.
it is, yeah, it is a real issue. So obviously, I don't yet think there was no real major incidents as a consequence of ground effect, but I think one of the real
I think
reasons
an
we got a
additional
quit ground effect was the
Yeah, an
cost
additional
factor.
thing was that they started developing these things called skirts at the side of cars,
Exactly.
like you mentioned, that essentially kept the low pressure zone intact under the car to get it to stick. And the problem was that if a car went over a curb or just slightly went off track and the skirt broke suddenly,
Yeah,
that sudden loss in the low pressure, sudden
downforce.
air rushing in, flipped the car
Yeah.
over essentially, and that
Exactly.
created very dangerous scenarios. However, next year, I think the new
We're
rules
having ground
are gonna
effect
have
again.
ground effect back, but in a more controlled and a nice,
Yeah,
safer way. But I'm really excited to see what ground effect brings to it because, like Ved mentioned, the turbulent wake of cars these days with their big wings and their big spoilers actually is a very big comparative advantage to the car that's in front of the other car. But with ground effect, that doesn't happen anymore. With ground effect, you're going to see much better racing and much closer racing
Yeah.
in F1 and other sports as well because there is no like turbulent wake from the big wings and the big aerodynamic devices on top of the car. It's just the car getting sucked to the ground because of the Venturi effect. Uh, but yeah, everything that we mentioned so far about cars generally was more of a up to now look, right? And now we want
Yeah.
to take a more futuristic outlook. We want to look more towards the future and see where the automotive industry is going to go essentially from here. And I think one of the biggest things that you ask anyone about, oh, what's going to happen in 10 years in cars? One of the biggest answers you'll get, one of the most common answers you'll get, is electric cars, electric vehicles. Tesla has led a revolution in that. Elon Musk. I mean, we've gone 2 episodes and we've mentioned him. We've gone 3 episodes and mentioned him twice so far. This man's really doing everything
Yeah.
out here. Uh, but yeah, let's talk about electric cars. Let's see how what makes electric cars so different as compared to normal internal combustion cars.
I mean,
Yeah.
see, in principle, again, we go back to the first law of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So, what is our end goal in a car? Mechanical energy. We're producing mechanical energy that obviously goes into some form of kinetic energy. Now, the only way an electric car differs from a conventional combustion engine car is how it reaches that mechanical energy. So in our combustion engines, we have chemical energy, which is obtained from a chemical reaction into heat, which goes into mechanical. In an electric car, basically, we have electrical energy, which is directly causing rotational mechanical energy, which is then being translated to kinetic energy. So the way the motors, the way the power delivery works at the back end of it is very similar to how a combustion engine would work. It's just the fact that how those shafts are rotated and how that power, how that torque is delivered to the wheels, which is different in an electric car. And of course, you're completely eliminating a very, very, very heat and environmentally inefficient chemical reaction, which is the process of combustion by using electric cars. So you're just completely eliminating that, which is only a good thing for the environment. Whether it's yet a good thing for the environment in 2021, I'm not sure, given the fact that the electricity we're using to charge our electric cars is yet coming from fossil fuels. But
Yeah.
I'm sure we're taking a step in the positive direction in how EVs are going. And I think one of the real issues people have had with EVs so far, especially in a country like India, is, oh man, EVs are just too expensive. Like
Yeah.
Teslas are like 85, 90
That's like
lakhs
insanely expensive. The tax
after
slab on
import
Teslas
duties.
is
Exactly.
too much.
And once you get the
And not just
foreign
Teslas,
car
but
tax
even
into it.
even other EV cars, not just in India, but even abroad, they're yet nowhere near as affordable as their combustion counterparts.
Yeah, I
but
think affordability aside as well, the infrastructure really. I mean, abroad is
exactly
much better,
the
but
reason,
India is almost non-existent.
yeah, the reason I think
Yeah.
that expensive is one, we're at like what we term a paradigm shift. I think a paradigm shift, if someone does a lot of physics, is basically a complete change in understanding or a huge sort of innovation age, and I think we're at a
Yeah.
paradigm shift in the automotive industry right now, where we're going from
100%.
combustion to EV. And I
Yeah.
think what's making the EV transition expensive is that it is a paradigm shift, and it's a very expensive one, because these ideas, while the ideas are born in the head, I think replicating them onto a physical standpoint is very, very
Incredibly hard.
expensive. And
Yeah.
you could have all the funding in the world, but at the end of the day, the automotive companies do work for a profit. So all the money that they're putting in has obviously got to be got back in some form, and
Yeah.
that form is through pricing
Yeah.
expensive cars. And also the reason they're expensive is, of course, supply and demand, because you're talking about large scale production of lithium ion batteries right now. And the reason
Which is very hard.
some metals are expensive is because they're rare. There's not as much demand for them. If you compare gold to aluminum, gold is only more expensive because there's less demand for it, which makes it more rare. The day we can find as much gold, and the day we need as much gold as we need aluminum, gold will also be cheap. And that's the thing with the full EV industry right now. The fact is that they're just not manufacturing enough of it yet. Because there's not enough demand for it yet to be economically viable on a
Yeah.
huge scale, which is why I think EVs are a bit expensive, but I think the prices are dramatically coming down.
Yeah,
Like
slowly
at a
but
rate of
surely we're
not
moving in the right
everywhere.
direction. I mean, we're going to talk about this later as well.
Yeah.
The general automotive industry is taking steps and, in fact, major leaps towards an all-electric future. But I think at the fundamentals now, talking about how electric vehicles really work, they don't have an engine. Obviously, there's no internal combustion engine in electric car. The power comes from batteries, and they're very similar to the batteries you have at home. It's a cathode and anode and electrolyte in the middle, and multiple of these batteries that are kept in an electric car provide the power for it. However, batteries can only give DC power, right? But electric cars use an alternator to convert that to AC power, which then goes to an induction motor which runs the wheels, right? And as opposed to an induction motor is a much smaller device. It's not as big as an engine, it's not as heavy as an engine. However, typically you'd still see electric cars are much heavier than normal internal combustion cars, and that's because of the weight of the batteries. The sheer amount of batteries required to power an electric car across long distances is huge. Because of that, the electric cars tend to actually weigh a lot more than internal combustion cars of the same nature. And a very interesting thing that you get by having induction motors is that in a normal car, or the torque of the engine actually rises up as you're revving the engine up, and when you shift up to another gear to reach a higher speed, the torque actually goes down and then goes up again. It goes down, goes up, goes down, goes up, and that continuously happens as you gain more and more speed. You aren't really able to access all of the engine's power and all the engine's torque at an instant. However, in an induction motor, that isn't the case. You don't need these gears to level up to a higher speed. You can simply get access to all of the torque that the engine has, the motor has in this scenario, all at once. So from 0 to 60, you will have all that torque available at each second of that journey. And because of that, you're able to get much higher performance levels, really, that are only possible with normal internal combustion cars anywhere. And you're seeing all these new electric cars breaking all these records, and it's because you're able to get all that power down at that instant as soon as you touch the pedal down, and it's instantaneous response. And because of that, you're seeing a lot of innovation with electric cars and performance in any scenario. And there's also a lot more that actually makes electric cars appealing, especially Teslas.
Yeah, and
Right,
yeah, that's
and
really cool because Teslas are known obviously for being Elon Musk's brand of electric cars, right? It's eco-friendly, it's better for the environment. We discussed all of that, but I think the one other feature of Teslas is what people the one other feature that people really know about and what really makes them famous is the fact that Teslas are branded as self-driving cars, right? Something
yeah,
that something that hasn't really been seen before, because for all of history you need a car and you need someone to drive it. That's the first rule of cars. And to just think that you can have a car that's capable of doing all the same things that you've been used to doing with your normal cars. It takes you to the same places, it drives safely, it makes sure you have a comfortable ride, all of those things. The fact that you can have a car that does all of those things without you putting in any effort or paying attention to the road is absolutely mind blowing, right? And that's why there's so
yeah,
much like hype behind Tesla, right? The fact that you can sit in your back seat and just, I don't know, watch a movie, play a video game, be completely focused on one other thing without even looking up at the road, right? That's something that's so incredible, and that's why Tesla has, I think, the highest market cap of like car companies now. So has a market cap that's
Yeah, despite
higher
producing
than
significantly lesser
yeah,
vehicles. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah, and I
They
think
don't make or sell as many vehicles as Toyota, which is the largest
exactly.
manufacturer of cars,
right,
but they still have a
right.
higher market cap because of the hype and because of how much people like Teslas.
Exactly, but Saksham, I mean, of course, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Since we're on that topic of Tesla's success, it's also a lot to do with the cult Elon Musk has
Following.
created around
Yeah,
himself and
100%.
around Tesla, and it's not just a point where it's been like, okay, wow, Tesla is the pinnacle of technological innovation in the automotive industry. It for sure, undoubtedly is, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also how Elon Musk has, in a way, removed the stigma around owning an
Electric
electric
cars.
car.
yeah,
100%.
Granted, it's a very expensive way to rid of a stigma right now. I don't think many people have $50,000 lying around, but nonetheless,
Mm-hmm.
for the people who do have $50,000 lying around, he's made it cool to own a Tesla, which
Yeah.
I don't think
yeah.
other
It really
companies
has.
have, because other companies have stuck to their roots and what their
Mm-hmm.
company has stood for. But I think Tesla is really appealing to the millennial. Tesla is appealing to
Oh,
this age
100%.
category of 20 to 30, especially given you're considering you're in the IT age right now. You're
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah,
this tech boom, which has gone on for 20 years, and I'd say we have 20 more years of it left.
Mm-hmm.
In an age where everything is going digital, the fact that you have an autonomous car is just, Elon Musk has used that so brilliantly, and he's just created this. It's not just the
Mm-hmm.
driving aspect he's modernized, just the displays on the Tesla, the driving aids, the gizmos on the Tesla. It's
Yeah.
brilliant, and he's made it modern. He's made it cool. He's made it relatable to every
Mm-hmm.
person who's gone in to buy
yeah,
Tesla, and I
Yeah.
think that's what's made Tesla as a company itself so
Yeah,
successful.
I think the Tesla community, just the community of drivers in Tesla,
Exactly.
they feel like they're part of the brand. You know, there's certain way they interact with customers and because there's a higher attention, uh, being life, uh, electric vehicles great for the environment. You know, we love them. They're fast. They're cool. Uh, but environmental concerns don't just end with electric vehicles being, no emission. There's no combustion happening. There is, like Hushrav mentioned, a lot of rare earth mineral mining, like lithium and cobalt, and because of that, there are environmental concerns with electric cars as well. In the initial production of electric cars, because of these mining of these rare elements like lithium and cobalt, they do actually release a far higher amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the environment. And because of that, the initial production of an electric car is actually way worse for the environment than a normal car. Given in the long run, yes, electric cars do pay that off and beat a normal car any day. The initial production is something that needs to be fixed, needs to be taken care of if electric cars are truly to become the future of our world. And additionally, like Kushal again mentioned, most of the electricity we get today is from non-renewable energy, from coal, etc., etc., coal and oil. And because of that, again, every time that you do charge your electric car, you can't really truly be guilt free. You know the electricity that you're charging your car with isn't entirely clean. And that also, I think we are moving towards a more renewable future, a more sustainable future. But as soon as we're able to make that transition to that, electric cars can truly become the future and can really become what we want them to become. They can truly become us having fun in cars, driving around without feeling guilty about harming the environment and saving the planet as well. Yeah. Uh, but you know what? Even if we were to move from electric cars for a second here, even though electric cars are the new big trend and everyone's talking about them, there is still hope for combustion engines. There is still hope for combustion
Exactly.
cars to stay in the future, and it's a very exciting thing called alternate fuels. And let's address that now. Let's see what alternate fuels are all about. Yeah.
Okay, so alternate fuels. We have biofuels and we have synthetic fuels. Now,
Yeah.
biofuels, I'm going to let Ved get into the specifics, the chemistry of biofuels, but the way biofuels primarily really work is they exploit natural biological processes such as decomposition and whatnot. And again, it all comes back to conservation of energy. You're changing energy from one form to another, and that's how you're getting biofuel. And synthetic fuels are basically, again, fuels that are sort of lab engineered. They've not been from the core of the earth, which is obviously great, because not only are you preserving the resources of the earth, but you're also sort of reducing all the emissions that would have occurred while mining for those very resources. And I think the reason why, if you told me, if you gave me the choice right now, would you move to electric? I would obviously say yes, but I think many people, and arguably and understandably so, many people are yet sort of stuck up on combustion engines, because we've not really reached that stage of a great driving experience on a large scale with many electric cars. They still feel a bit lanky, and they don't feel the same as combustion cars, which is why the way companies like Mercedes are looking to appeal to the combustion customer is through synthetic fuels. Mercedes themselves, Toto Wolff, very recently announced they plan to have 100% synthetic fuel fleet. If not 100% EV fleet, at least 100% synthetic fuel fleet by around
Formula
2025 to 2030. Exactly. Formula One has very recently stated that they're not only going to reduce, not only are they going to increase the electrical dependence, the electrical component of the engine. So we were last year talking about scrapping the MGUH, which we discussed earlier, but in fact, not only are they not going to scrap the MGUH now, they're also going to add a few more components to it.
Which is more electric.
Exactly, which reduces. They're going to make it. I think, Saksham, the right word to use here is they're going to make it more hybrid, because that's what hybrids are about. They're about that balance between combustion and the electric component. So they're focusing on making that hybrid dependency move more towards electric and less towards combustions. However, this has naturally upset a few, you would say, motorsport sort of. The old guard, so to speak, because a lot of people, and again, understandably so, want that loud roar of the V10s we had in 2004, 2005. And you start to wonder if you are really sort of moving towards a point where you're increasing the electric dependency, then why not just do Formula E? It's exactly what Christian Horner has said. If there's nothing interesting in the new F1 regulations for 2025, and you're just going to keep increasing the electric component day by day, then why doesn't Red Bull just go and do Formula E? Because Red Bull itself has a huge personal stake here. Red Bull 2025 onwards will manufacture its own engines for the first time in Formula One. So far, it's always been a customer to a certain. It's been a customer to Renault. It's been a customer to Honda. This is the first time Red Bull is going to be making their own engines, and obviously, as from a development standpoint, from an R&D standpoint, they don't want to be. And like I said, these engines are ready. The reason the MGUH was going to be scrapped last year was to cut down on the cost, and by increasing the electric components associated with it, you're only going to drive up the cost further, which for an entity like Red Bull, which mind you is not a car company in its very being. Red Bull does not have commercial cars to offset that offset that production cost. So it's not that viable for them. I can see why they're upset, but obviously at the end of the day, it is the right way to go at a point where people are saying F1 should go all electric. Some people are saying the end of F1 is near, in the sense that combustion cars just...
But all fuels can save them.
Exactly. I think moving to synthetic fuels and moving to alternate forms of power. It is arguably the silver lining. Go on, Ved.
I'm saying Porsche is actually like trying to use alt fuels. So what they're doing is they're trying to actually use dimethyl ether, and they're using electricity to make it, right? So that part of the process isn't harmful to the environment either. And they're making these fuels, these synthetic fuels, using electricity, and by using it, like you said, using synthetic fuels, they're not using a non-renewable source of fuel, right? They're not using the conventional sources. And I think they tried hydrogen too. They tried using hydrogen as a fuel source, and that didn't exactly work. But again, it's a cool concept. It's eco-friendly. It's good for the environment, and it's not a non-renewable source.
I think think what's very cool about alt fuels is that you can use the existing infrastructure. You can use existing petrol pumps. You
Yeah.
can use existing filling methods, filling times, and just replace the fuel with something else essentially. Formula One, I think. So I mean, coming back to Formula One again. Currently, I think in the fuel mixture, 5.75% of it is biocomponents, and F1 has stated
Yeah.
that they want it to become 100% sustainable by 2030. So in the next 9 years, we should be seeing F1 cars running without any harmful emissions. And if they're able to achieve that, if technology is able to reach that point by then F1 is never going to stop, and you're still going to be able to enjoy the same engines, and you're going to be able to enjoy the same sound,
Yeah.
and see F1 race continue to race.
That's
Yeah.
kind of it's kind of what's happening with Formula E right now. Because if you check out Formula E, so far, like ever since they started all the way back in 2014, 15 was the first
Yep.
season.
I
Yeah,
think, yep.
they've had a net carbon footprint of 0, right? Which is insane because sure, like different competitions like Formula One, they're trying to reduce their carbon footprint, and that's good and all. But here they haven't like even reduced it. It's just always been 0, and that's why
Wade,
like
you mentioned that net carbon zero footprint. Let's clear that up. So
yeah, for sure. Go on.
many people, when you think of net carbon zero footprints, when you think of carbon zero footprint, you think, okay, wow, they're just like not emitting any carbon at all. But that's not what it is. They don't have an absolute zero carbon usage. What they have is a net zero carbon usage, which means while obviously the cars are not using any carbon, to set up the full Formula E sport, to set up the paddock, to build the materials that go onto the car, you're releasing some amounts of carbon. For that matter, even the trucks transporting the cars race to race are still at the end of the day combustion engine trucks, and they are releasing carbon. But what net zero carbon is doing is basically they've roughly calculated the amount of carbon they're using up each race weekend and to run the full operation, and they're offsetting that amount of carbon used through other activities. So they're planting a certain amount of trees in each city they visit. All Formula E race at street tracks that are in cities. So they're engaging the cities in a bunch of environmental initiatives, planting more trees. They're also contributing hugely technologically to the road divisions of a lot of manufacturers. So we have companies like Nissan, Audi, Schaeffler, we have Porsche, we have Mahindra, an Indian company, who's arguably been the pioneer of EV technology in India. I think, I don't remember the car, but that was a really small one. That was the first electric car that came in, which is by Mahindra. So since Formula E has come, by making a motorsport lead by example with the support it's got from the FIA, I think it's great because it's made people trust, I would say, electric vehicles more, and it's shown people that electric vehicles can be fun and they can be fast.
It sort of gives a sense of legitimacy to electric
Exactly.
vehicles. It gives a seal of approval that, electric vehicles are here.
Exactly.
They're great, and you should go electric.
And obviously, like I said, the technological upsides to it, when you have the smartest engineers working on technology on a Formula E car, naturally those engineers have been able to transfer that exact same, if not similar technology onto the road cars of their respective companies, which is just, it's upside and upside for the industry as a whole, because you're having a great source of motorsport running on an alternate source of energy, but you also have that same thing progressing to production cars, which is just brilliant.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's great stuff happening with electric cars, and it's been driven by a combination of, I think, government factors, where government social groups are getting into it, and also the companies themselves. I think there are a lot of companies that have taken great steps forward, have promised us great things, and that's a general trend that we see in socially responsible companies that want to make a change, that are showing towards electric cars.
Yeah, because like a lot of companies have like come forth recently and talked about how in the next maybe 5, maybe 10 years, they're looking to move either to a more electric approach, or a lot of them just said that they plan on going entirely electric, right? One example of this is Jaguar, and they're basically talking about going all electric by 2025, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. Because, 4 years and all electrics. And that's pretty cool. And also, in addition to going all electric by 2025, like every new model that they come out with, They're planning on
Mhm.
remaking the older models, like the ones that have already been made in like a petrol or diesel variant. Planning on remaking those as electric cars by 2030. So by 2030, we should have every
Mhm.
single Jaguar car ever created
It's
as
all
an
electric
electric
Jaguars.
variant. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure it's because they care about the environment and are doing it for like,
Mhm.
because it's eco-friendly. But also, Jaguar is
Yeah.
it's a UK-based company, right? Manufacturer,
Mhm.
and the UK government actually wants to outlaw the sale of like fully petrol or fully diesel cars by 2030. So in order to kind of, I mean, get the jump on
Yeah.
that, uh,
Seems a bit unrealistic and
yeah,
No,
I,
but
harsh. I mean,
honestly, Saksham, I think
yeah.
the important thing here is the reason I think we're seeing a positive
Mhm.
towards these from all these companies. Like I think Jaguar is was the first to introduce like a huge target, like this milestone of
Mhm.
2025 all EV, and a lot of companies have followed suit since then. And I think the reason we've got these targets in 2020, 2019 is because I think up until that point, up until 2018, 2019, many car makers, at least in my opinion, didn't view
Mhm.
the shift to electric as a necessity. They
Mhm.
viewed it as an option, something that they could
Yeah.
cater to a certain section
yeah,
of the market. But I think it's only very recently, and I'm talking by recent, I mean the last year, the last 2 years,
Mhm.
that car makers have actually realized, and it's hit them that oh man, we might actually go
Yeah.
electric very, very
Mhm.
soon. And many car makers
They're
have
all
taken it
scrambling
as
to
a
catch
sort of,
on.
yeah, they've sort of
Mhm.
realized that if we don't move to electric, we might not survive, and not survive in the sense that no one would buy the cars, but survive in the sense that
Mhm.
the government might just not allow them to sell their cars anymore.
Yeah.
And in addition, that you're also moving towards the millennial generation, and you're moving
Mhm.
towards Gen Z, which is our generation, and we've
Mhm.
grown up under the pretense of global warming, and we've grown up
Yeah.
yeah,
with the impression like we've all got our drive licenses in the era where we've been told petrol and diesel
Mhm.
engines are bad and electric is the way forward. So
Mhm.
in
yeah,
5 to 10 years, we're going to be the next consumers to these
Mhm.
cars. And I think they've figured out that to appeal to this generation and to make a
Mhm.
profit during this time, we have to go EV. And I think that is why these companies are setting such ambitious
Yeah.
targets for themselves. And I think they will
Mhm.
meet those targets because
I
you
hope.
have
I'm very excited to see electric cars from
yeah,
exactly
all these
same.
brands. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. But also I think hydrogen fuel technology really. I mean, it was a fad. It came. It went in a way.
yeah,
But I still think that maybe somewhere that could see a resurgence. You see Toyota launching this new 2021 Mirai, and even Honda still continuing to sell their hydrogen-powered cars. And I think that if there was enough investment in hydrogen fuel cells, maybe we could also see the future of hydrogen cars. In fact, I think even Jaguar is the has sort of dedicated a part of it, and maybe has looked into are looking into right now hydrogen fuel cell cars as well. And that
yeah.
might be an interesting angle to see what we might go into. Yeah.
Yeah, because it really
Mhm.
takes out all the tailpipe emissions, right? That's the problem with the current
Mhm.
Yeah.
cars that run on non-renewable sources of energy. And the only byproduct that you kind of get is water, as opposed to, like in the internal combustion engines. At the end of that combustion reaction, you get the
Mhm.
CO2 and you get the water. And the CO2, again, like greenhouse gas, is really harmful for the environment. You're really eliminating that harmful
Mhm.
factor, and you're just getting water at the end, and that makes it a clean technology, and that's what they should be moving towards, right?
Um,
Like, this is something they should be looking at.
but you know what,
Yeah,
Ved?
Mhm.
I think the biggest obstacle hydrogen fuels especially are going to face is it's the Hindenburg syndrome. I don't know if you guys are
Yeah.
familiar with it, but
I'm familiar with the
we know the
disaster, not
yeah
the
the
syndrome.
Hindenburg
Yeah.
exactly. So it's
yeah,
it's
Mhm.
based on the disaster. So we had the Hindenburg, the huge
Mhm.
German airship. Hydrogen like the airship
Mhm.
was comprised of hydrogen, and obviously something went horribly wrong, and the full thing blew up.
Mhm.
Hydrogen, we know basic chemistry, insane combustible, and
Very
naturally everything
combustible.
went
Yeah.
up in
yes,
flames. So what the Hindenburg syndrome has really sort of negatively impacted the hydrogen fuel industry in the way is that everyone perceives it to be unsafe. Is it
Mhm.
unsafe? Absolutely. But obviously we have learned a lot since the Hindenburg disaster. We've
Yeah.
almost come 100 years since then. Obviously, so far there's been no real large-scale disaster of a hydrogen fueled
Yeah.
car, and
Yeah.
it's just that notion people are going to have to work against, that hydrogen fuel is unsafe, because that's what they've termed as the Hindenburg syndrome. It's just this fear people have of hydrogen-powered vehicles because of the Hindenburg disaster. So I think while it seems small on the face of it, it is
It's a pretty
quite a
big
huge
challenge.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a large notion that changed in a lot of people, because a few scientists proving and believing that hydrogen isn't dangerous isn't going to change much, because you need to change the mindsets of millions of people who are going to actually buy these cars. And I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest barrier for hydrogen fuel, which is why I think while EVs realistically, I can see myself living in a 100% EV world by, say, 2035. I don't see
Yeah.
hydrogen fuel becoming a thing, at least for the next 20, 25 years. I think we have a
Yeah,
lot of research
Yeah.
yet to
Right.
do
definitely.
there.
Unless
Because
someone like Elon Musk or someone like a Tesla
yeah.
comes along and suddenly speeds up
Exactly.
hydrogen
Yeah.
cars to the level.
Because yeah.
Yeah, but I think even infrastructure is a big challenge in that regard, so it's highly unlikely. But we will see.
Yeah, and also you need to change the mindset not only of the people creating the cars, like not just the people who are manufacturing it who think it's safe. You also need to make the people who are going to buy the cars understand that, and because this is is huge like negative sort of mentality towards hydrogen fuel, that's actually where the real challenge is going to lie. It might not even be with the technology itself. It might just be with the customer, with customers, right, on their end of it. Yeah. So that's Jaguar. We also have Bentley, all right. And so Bentley plans on releasing their first electric vehicle by 2025, and after that, like as they move towards an all-electric policy, they're planning on making all their releases either EVs, electric vehicles, or PHEVs. Hushrav, can you just tell everyone or like educate people about
Okay.
what
Um,
PHEVs are?
EVs. Okay, so
Yeah.
EVs are your traditional 100% EVs. So you sort of they operate on
Yeah.
electricity. Now your PHEVs are what are termed as your plug-in hybrid vehicles. So the plug-in hybrids, the PH comes from that. So these are just hybrid electric vehicles whose battery can be recharged by just simply plugging it into like a standard charging cable with which you charge a standard EV. But the plug-in hybrid, again, the important part is the hybrid. They're not fully electric. So while you can plug them in and charge them as a conventional electric vehicle, these hybrids work two ways. You have these combustion engine cars which have a backup electric store. Those are also hybrids. Whereas you have cars that operate majority on electric power, which are these rechargeable ones, and have a backup, say, 50 km range of petrol or diesel attached to
Petrol,
them.
yeah.
So an
Yeah.
EV is just a 100% pure electric car, whereas a PHEV is a hybrid. It's a mix between electric and combustion engine.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Bentley is looking into both options.
So the
You
PHEV
know, the
essentially.
interesting thing is,
Sorry.
oh yeah, sorry. The interesting thing about these companies we're going through right now is that all British companies, and of course we discussed
Yeah.
this,
It's
the
the
government regulations. But
Yeah.
I don't think the government, obviously they've given them the plan that okay, by 2030 we're going to shut you all down if you all don't move to electric. But I think the British government has really sort of stimulated EV purchases in the last 3 to 4 years. They've
yeah.
given a lot of price subsidies, and they've really promoted the public to move towards EVs, which I think is it's really great to see that on a government level, and
Yeah.
especially
It's
given
really
it's in
great
Europe,
moves.
it's in
Helping
the
things
hub of
move along.
automation. Yeah, it's really sort of making countries around the UK also simultaneously react, which is only moving change in the positive direction. So the
Yeah.
fact that this has come from companies like Jaguar Land Rover and from Bentley, which were arguably who designed the most petrol guzzling,
Yeah. Most
grumpy
thirsty cars
cars.
ever. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fact that they have committed to moving EV, I think it's a real statement of intent, not just from the
Definitely.
companies, but also from the countries which are making them go for these changes.
Yeah.
So I think that's really great.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. We also have like Lotus as one of the last ones we'll be discussing here, but So what Lotus have done
Yeah.
is they recently, like, I think it was a few days ago, they released the Lotus Emira or Myra, I'm not sure, but they released it
Mhm.
as a petrol car, and apparently, according to the company, it's going to be their last petrol car that they release. And
Yeah.
now, yeah, so it's not like the other companies we discussed here, where in the next like 5 or 10 years they're looking to move into
Mhm.
making only electric cars. It's Lotus apparently
It's
after
now.
the Mira, yeah, it's now like after this one petrol release that they've done, everything else is going to be electric. So yeah, that's exciting to see.
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to seeing
Yeah,
how
in
that
fact,
will
we
go.
we have seen. In fact, we're going to talk about this in a bit as well. But we have seen Lotus come out with this new Evija, which is their all electric supercar.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting car actually. Looks phenomenal, and it's really cool. We're gonna talk about that in a bit as well. Yeah, but these like Hushrav said, these companies and the governments represent a trend, a general trend in the industry for us to want to move towards electric cars, and this has a big impact not only on motorsport, not only on commercial vehicles that we use every day, but also on the industry as a whole, in the manufacturing process and the way they make money, etc., etc. And who should just talk about a little bit about the shift in the general automotive industry, as
In UK is on Warwick campus where I'll be studying. So
yeah.
it really works well for me because remember, by the time I graduate, which will be in 2024 to 2025, I'm gonna be one of the first sort of engineers that comes out into a full EV company, and these generation
Yeah.
of engineers from my year, 5 years above and 5 years below me, we're going to be the first generation of engineers who are going to be born and brought up in a full EV engineering setup. And the sheer amount of technological knowledge that's going to go into this and it's going to be passed down is we won't require, I think
Yeah.
engineers 5 years from now won't require the same skill set that engineers right now are equipped with
Yeah.
because of simply the way we're moving forward in our design and in our approach. And I think that's interesting because it opens up the concept of engineering and it opens up a bunch of engineering jobs that people didn't know could exist, which will now exist. And it's going to be attractive to so many people who couldn't think they could become engineers or even designers for
Yeah.
that matter. And
Yeah.
that's suddenly going to be very appealing to a bunch of them. So I think the
Yeah.
industry as well, minus the economic standpoint, even from a labor standpoint, from an employability standpoint, is only looking good. And remember, again, we come back to the full concept of if teams replace people in factories, then what happens? And we're sort of going there in the sense that not only are we, because of the huge technological shift that's happening, not only are we going to require more hands on deck, but we're also going to require more people to create those things which are pushing this
Yeah.
development forward. So it's just going to be a vicious cycle of us needing more and more people to drive this change
Yeah.
forward. And that's typically what does
Yeah.
happen when you have a
I think a
situation
very
like
interesting thing you mentioned, and we talked about a little bit about before, as well, is that with EVs coming around, there's a larger emphasis on design, right? Larger emphasis
exactly.
on the way the car, the aerodynamics of the car, really. And I think that is really uh, representative of what we're trying to do over here at CHSCS Full Steam Ahead, where arts and design actually become an integral part of STEM to push innovation forward and to actually take us into the next age of innovation. And electric cars are going to be at the forefront of it. Electric cars are one of the biggest fields that use this, right? Colin
Yeah.
Chapman, apart from being a great thinker and inventor and a innovator in the field of cars, was also a big designer. And his design also did push the car industry forward. And I think that's the best encapsulation, best example of steam being used in a real life industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Moving on now, let's talk about some of the most exciting new cars now. Let's talk about some cars that we're really excited to see out there. Some new cars that are coming out that we really like. So who would I take a start on this?
Oh man, the Model S Blade. I mean,
Yeah.
what a
Let's
car!
play.
What a car! I
It's
mean,
great. It's
I'm
great.
Yeah.
I'm not a Musk fanboy by any stretch of the imagination. I appreciate his work and his contribution to Tesla and SpaceX. And mind you, he's arguably one of the greatest thinkers of our
Yeah.
generation. But
100%.
I mean, what they've done at Tesla with the Model S Blade is just insane.
Yep.
I mean,
Sub 2
we
seconds, 0 to 60.
yeah,
Yeah.
we were talking about a 1.9 second 0 to 60. We're talking about I think a 350-mile range, and
Yeah.
it's insane how they've sort of they've really covered every area possible here. They've made it the fastest. They claim to have made it the fastest production car on the market, but at the same time, they're boasting of a 350-mile range, which for
Yeah,
a
no,
Model X or a
390
Model
actually.
yeah,
I'm on the Tesla website right now.
yeah,
And they give a bunch of
exactly.
390 miles range, 1.99 seconds, 0 to 60 time, 200 per hour speed, 1020 horsepower of
Horsepower.
peak power, which is
It is
insane.
unheard of. I think
Yeah.
the earliest. I think I don't remember which Tesla the earliest one was. I think those did not produce more than 150 to 200 horsepower. Just
Yeah.
to see how far Tesla itself as a company has gone. I mean, it is literally
Yeah.
like they have a mode of the car, the ludicrous mode. I think what Tesla has
Yeah,
done
yeah.
with these cars is ludicrous in itself. I mean,
Yeah.
they've pushed green efficiency, they've pushed environmental efficiency, and they've also pushed sheer racing efficiency. And now I think the next stigma Musk is trying to remove of electric cars is the fact that they aren't fun on track, which is why we have the Roadster, obviously, which is the purpose-built sports car. We also
Yeah.
have the sheer performance of the Model S Plaid that he's trying to push through. And I think one place he's sort of giving that race car feel to it is the steering wheel. Really
Yeah.
controversial, in fact, among many people because um, all consumers are used to a full circular steering wheel, and to have this
Yeah.
half steering wheel, like a spaceship, almost an aircraft control type steering wheel, is really interesting. And I don't think, obviously, it's been done to make it look futuristic, like to make it look racy and sporty, but there's actually a scientific explanation behind it. And this doesn't come from Tesla itself, but this comes from the
Yeah.
Williams F1 team. And so F1, since the turbo hybrid era, obviously we had a lot of electronic gizmos to be controlled by the drivers. And for that, obviously they have these huge 8-inch LED screens attached onto the steering wheel, which turn with the steering wheel each time. Now, what Williams did was they actually didn't put up the LED panel on the steering wheel at all. They left the steering wheel as it is, just a piece, a mechanical piece, which turns left and right with a few buttons on it here and there. They attached the LED panel quite a way behind the wheel, actually. So Williams is yet the only team that has just the wheel attached. Now, why did they do that? That's the concept of inertia, right? And the formula for the moment of inertia is basically I is equal to mr squared, where m is the mass of the object and r is the
Yeah.
radius of the object. That's the moment of inertia it's going to possess. Now, what we're trying to do here is reduce the inertia. So when we reduce the inertia, basically, it sort of the wheel becomes less resistant to being accelerated. So when you're turning it left and right, it makes it easier basically to turn. It makes it more responsive. So the way they did this was obviously by you either need to reduce, this is maths, you need to reduce the M or the R. And obviously the R is hard to reduce given how dimensionally compact
Yeah.
F1 cars are. So obviously by removing the LED display of the wheel itself, you're reducing the mass of the wheel, which reduces the inertia of the wheel, which makes, in what was Pat Simmons, who was the lead designer at Williams, in his opinion, makes the wheel much more responsive and much easier to control. So I think Tesla has gone in a very similar direction with the Model S
It makes the
steering
Model S
wheel. But
a track car essentially.
yeah, and
To go around a
I
circuit.
think it's a very bold choice in my opinion because I'm sitting here being a possible automotive engineer, having this knowledge in F1, which is why I know the benefit of the system. But I think 90% of the Tesla consumers do not, and sorry, they're pretty confused and startled as to why he's moved away from the conventional design. And many people have given negative reviews, but I think this is only a matter of time, and it's just a matter of getting used to it, to the steering wheel adjustments. It's by no means unsafe. It's by no means a challenge to
They've
the
literally
steering
reinvented the wheel.
Exactly.
In a way.
Yeah. They've just really I like the way they've moved with the Plaid. I mean, we discussed this earlier, stupidly high coefficient, 0.21. I mean,
0.208.
that is butter through air.
It's really cool. And it's great to see
and
a
I
company
mean,
like Tesla doing it.
not that expensive. Saksham, if you're on the website, if you could, I mean, obviously, we're talking for a production website. I mean, for a production hypercar. I mean, for a production supercar, the price we're talking It is really affordable compared to say a Ferrari or Lamborghini or
And it beats a Ferrari or Lamborghini
yeah,
in quite a lot of
exactly
Yeah.
specs.
to
It's
get that performance.
$125,000, which a lot of money, yes, but
Granted,
way
yeah.
lesser than
And
a
the
Ferrari or a
performance for the
Lamborghini.
performance it's offering, you can't even argue
Yeah,
about it. I
it's
mean,
it's
Yeah.
it's next level performance. Like,
and mind you, the best part of this is it does all of this while yet quintessentially being what a Tesla is, which is this cool
yeah,
electric vehicle which drives by itself. So it does
it's a
everything the model
sedan.
X,
It's got
Y,
four
Z has.
seats.
Exactly.
It's got a gaming
It's
console
good.
built into it. There's all sorts of cool stuff and cool gizmos that you can do with it, all while also being faster than a Ferrari from 0 to
I think
60.
Yeah.
it's really what Tesla, it's really the market
Mhm.
image Tesla is trying to create right now. I think it's best represented by the Model S Plaid. They're
Yeah.
trying to show that they're not afraid of pushing the bounds of what they have, but at the same time they're trying to be fun. I mean, I think he played Witcher 3 on that console,
Yeah,
if I
it was
remember
just here on the
correctly.
console.
Yeah.
Um,
The launch
he's
event. Yeah.
he's I don't think
And Cyberpunk.
anyone, yeah, I don't think anyone will ever play those games on the console, but the sheer the relief a consumer gets in knowing that my car can do this, I think
Yeah,
is
it's
what
Yeah.
Tesla
it's
is
a
trying to
brag.
put forward.
Yeah. These
And
like extreme brag
it's really cool.
points.
That the model, yeah, I think the Model S
Yeah.
Plaid is going to be a real, I think it's going to be a pioneering car for the generations to follow.
100%. I mean, Tesla as a company is a pioneering company in
Exactly.
EVs, and
Yeah.
Model S Plaid is just another step forward for them. Uh, Moving on from the Model S Plaid, which we can talk for hours about because of just how great of a car it is. We have essentially a series of cars, right? So you have all these F1 teams that also make cars. Most F1 teams also make cars, and you have some really interesting stuff that happens when you try to fit the F1 engine or the F1 powertrain essentially, or a version of it in a road car. For Mercedes, that's the Mercedes Project One. For
Yeah.
Red Bull, for Aston Martin, it's the Aston Martin Valkyrie made
Valkyrie.
with Red Bull.
Yeah.
And for Ferrari, a couple of years back, it was the LaFerrari. And the LaFerrari is really iconic in this way that it sort of started this thing. The LaFerrari was the first car to have that MGUH and MGK system, like Hushrav mentioned, and to really act like a Formula One car in that sense. And a truly beautiful car, almost iconic at this point. And that's led on to this trend of Mercedes and Aston Martin also making their own road cars slash track-oriented versions of the road cars that are based on their F1 cars, which is actually so exciting because it's just a different car. Like it's a hypercar, but not a hypercar. It's
Yeah.
just different from a
Yeah.
hypercar. Yeah,
You know,
very different
since
from your
we,
classic Lamborghini Ferrari.
yeah, since
Mhm.
we mentioned the Aston Martin Valkyrie, let's talk
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah.
Started in 2016, I think the concept. That's when the first concept
Mhm.
images of the Valkyrie came in, and that time it was set to be this insane collaboration between Red Bull Racing, the Formula One
Mhm.
division, and
Yeah.
Aston Martin, who were their title sponsor at that time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it was set to be the brainchild of Adrian Newey, who was, we know, the most,
Yeah.
along with Colin Chapman, I would say one of the most dominant designers in Formula One. So it was supposed to be Newey's brainchild. And in fact, the car has gone through so many reiterations and so many facelifts, despite not yet fully being in production. Just the sheer
Yeah.
upgrades it's got over the last 3 to 4 years. I think the first road going Valkyrie came out, like the first Valkyrie on a physical track came out, I think 2 or 3 years back now. And to think we've yet not gone to production with that really sort of shows you how much they're pushing. And the very simple fact that Aston Martin and Red Bull, who sort of united on this, are no longer working together because Aston Martin, now we know, has
Yeah.
their
They're
own Formula One
competitors now.
team. Exactly, has and
Yeah.
have they completely split from Red Bull. They no longer advertise it as a collaboration between Red Bull and Aston Martin. Now it's just Aston Martin's brainchild.
Yeah. It
So
looks amazing. It's the
yeah,
most
Yeah.
bonkers car that I think
Yeah.
I've ever seen.
Aston
It's got
Martins
all
in
these extra
general.
aero things on
Yeah.
it.
Aston Martins in general just look so beautiful, like all of them. But then this one
Yeah.
is like I haven't seen
Valkyrie's a big
Aston Martin make
departure
anything.
from the classic
Yeah.
DB design language. This is the most outlandish one I think
but
I've seen so
Saksham,
far.
it's yet in its way, it's retained those Aston Martin characteristics,
Oh,
right? I mean,
100%,
you can
100%.
see that this is. You won't say it's an Aston Martin road car, but you will know
Yeah.
this car was
It's an
designed
Aston
by Aston
Martin.
Martin. Like when
Yeah.
you see it in that Aston green, you
That's
know
green
it's an
color.
Aston
Yeah, the
Martin.
British
Yeah.
racing green. 100%. Yeah, definitely. Very exciting car. And obviously Mercedes Project One, the leaders
Project
of the
One,
V6
I
turbo
think.
hybrid era since its starting, won every single championship. might win this one also. But yeah, they put that exceptional engine, the exceptional powertrain in a road car. And what does that give us, Hushrav? What have made the Mercedes project one? Just where does it put it?
One, obviously, stupidly quick.
Yeah.
That is the instant sort of reaction you get when you
Mhm.
put F1 technology into a road car. But
Of course.
obviously, and I guess again, the project one, these are all these projects have been in development for 3 to 4 years now
Oh
already.
yeah, incredibly long
So
times.
that this is really positive for me to see because it
Mhm.
shows that these guys aren't really going for all out profits and just pushing an underdeveloped car out. They're really sort of fine tuning and getting every bit of
Mhm.
innovation to the point when they're innovating something in 2020 and they're working on an upgrade on it on 2021. The car hasn't even gone to production yet. And I think Mercedes,
Mhm.
the way Mercedes functions, we know this from their Formula One team, that they're after the
Yeah,
smallest margins all the time.
very efficient.
And
Yeah.
Always chasing
Mercedes,
excellence. Yeah.
exactly, and Mercedes in their road car division as well. They're
Mhm.
following the same thing with the Project One. They want it to be the perfect hybrid supercar, hypercar when it comes out. And
Mhm.
not only does it look stunning,
The
I mean,
definitive
arguably,
hypercar.
yeah,
Yeah,
I would say it looks the best out of these three. But
it does.
but
It looks
just
really,
that,
really good.
just the sheer sort of
Mhm.
performance they're trying to cramp into it all the time is
Yeah.
really, really impressive to see. And I think that's what makes all these three cars so exciting to me. I think LaFerrari, in a way, is
Yeah.
the sort of grandfather of these three in the sense that it's been
Mhm.
around for a while now. But you
Mhm.
Yeah.
have the Valkyrie and
And the
the
Project
AMG
One that are
Project
upcoming.
One. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And the fact
Yeah.
that Mercedes has collaborated with AMG on this, which is
Mhm.
their performance car arm.
Yeah. Performance
It really
division.
shows, yeah, it
Mhm.
shows that they're going all hands on deck for this one. They don't want to
Mhm.
leave any stone unturned. And I think,
Yeah.
again, not just technologically, but that's a huge statement of intent, even from a marketing point of view, because it's not just the
Yeah.
Mercedes Project One, it's the Mercedes
Once you put
AMG
the
Project
AMG badge
One.
on it, there's no going back. You know the car's gonna
Exactly.
be insane, and the highest level performance they
Yeah.
can reach, possibly reach. Yeah. Okay. Now to answer the question, what if you took the Tesla Model S Plaid and removed the two seats, made it shorter, made it lower, and essentially made it like a sports car? What do you get?
Roadster.
You get the Tesla Roadster. You get an all-electric sports car, an all-electric hypercar that is absolutely nuts and will push the boundary even more. And Tesla Roadster isn't the only one. There's other companies as well that are looking to make electric supercars. Lotus, like we mentioned before, the Aya is an
Yeah.
absolutely nuts electric car, all electric supercar that they're making. Rimac have made the Nivera, which almost in its performance, and it's posted some of the best figures that we've ever seen from a car that's pre-production right now, hasn't really come out right now, but the testing is extremely promising, and I'm really excited for that car.
I
So
mean,
let's go
also,
into
it's
them one
pretty
by one.
impressive what Rimax done, given
Oh,
they basically
100%.
totaled one prototype what they had
Total one
made.
prototype.
Oh,
Yeah, Richard Hammond from the
Uh,
Grand Tour.
Grand Tour. Yeah.
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 Okay, let's get into them one by one. So the Lotus Evija, and I'm on the Lotus website now. Let's give some specs, okay? 2,000 horsepower, which Lotus claims is the most powerful car ever to enter production. 1,680 kilos, which is the lightest EV hypercar ever enter production. 200 plus miles per hour top speed, and a 250 mile range. Just those numbers alone are staggering. This car has more power than a Bugatti Chiron. It's designed with more
By a long way.
aero
By
by
a
a
long
long
way.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's designed with the most insane aerodynamics you've ever seen. The car has got two tunnels like on it. It's got big holes on it,
Not
channel air
just
through the.
just that. I think
Yeah.
those are more sort of, granted they will have an effect, but I think those also contribute a lot cosmetically. I think
Oh,
as someone
100%.
who
It's
does
so
sort of
good.
read up on this tech stuff and who's very
Yeah.
into aero, the part that appeals most to me in the car is that diffuser structure. We were speaking about this before we began the podcast. I mean, the
Yeah.
sheer
Yeah.
complexity of that diffuser, we're reaching close to Formula One levels of complexity on that Lotus Evija, on that
Yeah.
diffuser. I mean, the details, as far as I can see, they've even attached minor serrations at the bottom of the diffuser to create more vortexes at the rear, and just
Yeah.
the way it's going to be planted through the corners, which, mind you, is a real challenge in electric cars, because one of the reasons electric cars were supposed to be not fun and boring to drive is because
Because the weight.
the batteries were just very lazily placed at the underside of the car, which really sort of ruined the center of gravity of the
Yeah.
car, and they just didn't make it fun to drive. So the fact that we're getting these identical combustion engine hypercar designs in electric cars now, it's interesting to see how these companies have played around with battery placement and played around with battery design even to get to this stage.
Yeah.
So I think how the balance of these cars goes around the track, they might be able to replicate the lap time of a combustion engine hypercar, but it's going to be
Oh,
interesting to see
more
how
than
they, yeah,
enough.
I think
Yeah.
it's going to be
It's going to be
interesting to see
beating
how they
combustion
make
cars.
up. Yeah, I think the way a combustion car generates that lap time compared to how an electric car generates that lap time, I think that's going to be very interesting to see where the differences come in,
Yeah.
because there is no doubt I really don't think they're going to function similarly around the track.
No,
So
100% not. And I
yeah,
think
it's going to be fun to
it's so
see.
right and so poetic in a way that the first such an aerodynamically complex electrical supercar, Lotus,
Lotus,
it almost
exactly.
brings it back full circle with Colin Chapman starting this whole aerodynamic trend in F1, the Lotus. And it's really good to see Lotus going back to these insane downforce things that they have. Next car, Rimac Nivera, which I've also put on the website for. 1,914 horsepower. Not as much as the Lotus, lacking by 8. Not that much. 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 1.97 seconds. 0 to 300 kilometers an hour in 9.3 seconds. This car can go to 300 quicker than some cars can go to 60. And I think the most exciting number here is that this car has blitzed the quarter mile lap time, the quarter mile drag strip lap time, and has done it in 8.6 seconds.
Saksham, I think that number comes from what I think is an even more impressive number, which is the amount of torque this car, 2,306 newton meters of torque.
It's too much. It's
To
too much.
think it's
So
electric, to
powerful.
think you have
Yeah.
all that torque
Yeah.
under one stamp, because like you explained earlier, in combustion engine cars, the torque moves gradually. You
Yeah.
shift up, goes back down, goes back up again.
Yeah.
To think here it goes zero torque and then
Yeah.
2,300 straight away.
Instantly all the way through.
There's nothing
Yeah.
in between is
There's
insane to think of.
It's really, really cool. They've got 4 independent motors doing powering all 4 wheels. And it's really like it's really otherworldly almost. I mean, to hear these kind of numbers, 8.6 second quarter mile is more than any American muscle car currently in production I think can do. It's really, and it's a pre-production model. Like they're still continuing testing on this car. They're still trying to
Right.
improve on this time, and who knows what kind of records this car's gonna set in the future. I mean, once it comes out, sky's the limit. Really, they can do as much as they want with it.
And
And
I
it's
think
really exciting to see.
this is not that what do you
ago.
say? Not just not long ago, but this comes from a company that hasn't really been the talk of the town for very long. I mean, not many people knew
Yeah.
Rimac even until
It's a Croatian company
Hammond,
started in
until
2009.
exactly.
compared to
Not a lot
other
of people even knew
manufacturers-
Rimac was making a car until Hammond literally flipped one over the wrong way.
Yeah.
So in a way, I think Hammond totaling a Rimac is the best publicity Rimac's got in a while. And
Yeah,
I think
100%. That's how I
they're
discovered
really
the brand.
deserving. Yeah, they're a really deserving company. They're a tight, close knit group of people. I think they don't have that many employees either.
No,
So to
much smaller
think
company.
that they're pushing like to the limit the capability
Yeah.
of what EV supercars are at right now, and going up against companies like Tesla with the Roadster and historic brands like Lotus, which have been here for decades now. It's really impressive. And I think Rimac, they've sort of cultivated this brand already. Like Tesla is sort of Tesla's trying to cover all the bases here. They're going for the affordable economic car. They're going for the
Yeah.
workers' car with the Cybertruck. They're going for the racers' car with the Roadster. They're going for the performance car with the Blade. Rimac has very clearly set out their direction. We're exclusively building supercars and hypercars. So
Yeah.
that makes them really
Definitely.
appealing to that kind of buyer, because the buyer knows these guys are serious about what they're doing. They know how to make a trackside car.
They're like a Bugatti or a Pagani or a Contour
Exactly.
XZ, but for electric cars.
Exactly.
Yeah. Definitely. And this brings us to the last, but definitely not least, Tesla Roadster.
Load.
And I'm again on the website. with some numbers. 0 to 60 at 1.9. Top speed over 250 this time. Mile range 620 miles, which is the highest of any electric car by a huge margin.
I think a lot of that
Uh,
comes in the weight, right? I think I would
Oh,
guess the Roadster
100%.
is significantly lighter than the Model S Plate, given it has
Oh yeah,
less seats and doesn't have the sedan profile that the Model S Plate does.
yeah, definitely. It's a much shorter car, and it's built in a way that maximizes the Tesla factor of it, right? It
Right.
takes the Model S Plaid and it goes bonkers with it. Like, what if the Model S Plaid didn't have to be Model S? And and
Right.
and they answer the question with the Roadster, that a completely bonkers car that should be coming out later this year, I think. But again,
Yep,
it's
I
gone through
think.
multiple delays, so we don't know
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
exactly it's gonna come out. But when it does, for sure, it's gonna be competing with the Navara and the Evija to see what's truly the best EV supercar of all time. And I think you see a big shift over here. You used to have the Koenigsegg's and the Paganis and the Bugattis and the Ferraris and the Lamborghinis competing for the hypercar title. But as we move towards EVs, you see these new companies like Rimac, Lotus. Typically, was in the hypercar segment before, and Tesla. Replacing the old companies and competing amongst themselves for the EV
And
hypercar crown.
that's what's making it so interesting, isn't it? To think like we're already this impressed with the fact that most of us didn't, I personally didn't believe in EVs as a proper alternative until 3 years to 4 years
Yeah.
ago, which is when Tesla
Right.
started really going for it. That time I thought, okay, wow, we might have a few good consumer cars, and by 2022, 2023, we might have an affordable EV car in India. And to think we're already at that stage of
Yeah.
hypercars, and to think that these are just companies who, in the last 3, 4 years, dedicated themselves to building a hypercar. What's going to happen when you have companies like Ferrari and McLaren and Lamborghini all going full hands on deck with their EV supercars
Yeah.
when they themselves realize? I think those are the last of the old guard who believe that combustion engine supercars are still going to be a thing. I don't blame them for it. I think there's
Yeah.
insane amounts of joy yet to be found in combustion engine
Yeah, I
cars.
mean,
Right.
all these companies have made one of the most iconic combustion engine
Yeah,
cars of all time.
it's going to be
So,
crazy to think when you have these really large companies. I mean, Lotus. I mean, what are the companies we have? Lotus and Rimac combined, I think, wouldn't represent a share of the market cap that Ferrari does. So to
Oh,
think what's going to happen
100%,
when Ferrari
100%.
gets into
Right.
EVs
I think
fully,
also it
it's
remains to
just
be seen which one of these companies can truly adapt
do
to
it
the EV
exactly.
model, right? Like, there's definitely going to be a few companies that just can't adapt as well as others can, and you're going to see a lot of your favorite car companies and car models essentially dying out or becoming a shell of their former selves because of this transition. It's a
Sure.
result of any transition, really. It's sad, but it's going to happen. It's almost certainly going to happen, and it remains to be seen just how where this innovation goes. Where this
We're going to have the
EV
rise of companies as
supercars
well.
go. Oh yeah,
We're going to have companies like Rimac,
new
exactly.
companies. Yeah, you don't know who could get up tomorrow and want to start an EV company, and just within a short span of I don't know 5, 6, 7 years, they might be the fastest hypercar
I mean,
company. in
we
the world.
had this with Ferrari, right? Ferrari
Yeah.
was sort of the boom of the combustion engine race car. Rimac might just be the
The
Ferrari
next Ferrari.
of the EVs.
Yeah.
And I guess
Who
time
knows?
will tell 20 to 30
Time will
years to
tell.
40 years
It
now.
remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Now let's end on a more personal note. Now let's talk about our favorite cars. Let's what some cars that are always going to be in your head that if you had the opportunity to buy, you would 100% go out and buy it. Just like your top 2, top 3 cars of all time.
No brainer for me would have to be the DeLorean DMC-12. I mean, or simply
Yep,
the
good car,
DeLorean, because
good
they
car.
really
Good
they
car.
just made one car.
Yeah, iconic.
Technologically, not that impressive. Not even for its time. Forget
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Not even for its time. It was far from a quick car. I mean, the 0 to 60 was 9.3, and the Rimac just did an 8.60 to 300. So
Yeah, it shows you where
yeah,
where
it
the DeLorean
shows the
is.
crazy. It shows the leaps in
think-
technology, of course, but also it's not. I don't like it from a technical, outright brute force point of view. I just love how iconic the DeLorean design is,
It's
and
beautiful.
also I've seen the
Steel
movie
frame.
Driven. Exactly, the gull-wing doors.
Yeah,
It's a
Can't beat it.
DeLorean when you see one. Like, you might not know that
100%.
it's a DeLorean but you do know,
Hmm.
You
oh, I've
recognize it
seen
for
this
sure.
car and I remember
It's
this
something
car.
special. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, like I said,
Hmm.
I can't understand, and I get why many people didn't like this car. It was basically it was funded through
It was
cartel money, the
slow,
production
bad
of the car.
handling.
Yeah, horrible
Yeah.
handling, a bunch of manufacturing defects.
Hmm.
We had gull wing doors. When they designed it, the doors obviously open upwards like this.
Hmm.
For whatever reason, the designers just forgot, if once a person sits in the car, how is he going to
Hmm.
shut the door back down? And
Yeah.
no
So you
one
still have
thought
to
of
get out
that.
again, reach
No
home,
one
and then
thought
put
of
it back
that.
up.
So they just had a very
Hmm.
stupid last minute solution to attach literally a strap to the door. So you have
Yeah.
to manually pull the door down. Speaking of
Hmm.
Colin Chapman, they had so many. The initial design was created by John DeLorean himself. Mind you, John
Hmm.
DeLorean had he was an automotive designer, of course, but
Yeah.
he just left. I think it was Ford one day, and he just thought,
Hmm.
okay, let me make my own car. Just
Yeah.
what John DeLorean is, let me put it into a car. So this was
Hmm.
wholly his design, no input
Yeah.
from anyone. And when he went to production and he got inputs from automotive
Hmm.
experts, they realized, okay, nice design, but not viable, which is why he got Colin Chapman on board. And
Hmm.
Colin Chapman actually he sort of took over the redesign
Hmm.
of the DeLorean. And
DeLorean.
Chapman didn't make many external design changes, but he did make a lot of composite material changes to what was going
Hmm.
into the DeLorean and to what made the
Yeah.
DeLorean and its parts. And he took a lot of this from Lotus. So the
Hmm.
DeLorean in itself, like I said, they had no automotive experience up until John
Yeah.
DeLorean literally drew the car himself. So the engine in the
Hmm.
DeLorean was a Renault C30 engine, I think.
Hmm.
Originally, it was going to be a Ford engine, which was then supposed to become a Citroen drivetrain. And eventually, I think they settled for a Renault engine.
Hmm.
So they were really just taking bits and pieces from every car company. They had a Renault engine, they had
Yeah.
design from Lotus. Um,
Yeah.
but that's what makes a car good. It's just madness. It's what
Hmm.
happens when you give a guy a piece of paper and you tell him let your imagination run wild. And that is why I love the
Yeah. Perfect
DeLorean. I think,
example of that.
yeah, given
Yeah.
the chance, it might not be the most fast car. It might not be
Hmm.
the fastest car. It might not be the most technologically advanced one. But
Yeah.
it is iconic, and that is
Has
why
a
I
thing
love it.
Yeah.
about it, an X
Exactly.
factor. Yeah. What's
Yeah.
yours, Vic?
I have three, and but the thing is, like Hushrav,
Hmm.
these aren't based on maybe performance or how they work like
Hmm.
technically.
Hmm.
Mine, and they don't even have like a cool backstory to the cars themselves. Mine are basically just based on
Yeah.
like memories and experiences. So one of them would be the McLaren P1, and that's actually just because
Beautiful
of
car.
it is, but it's
Hmm.
it's actually just because of I told you like one of the reasons I started liking cars was
Hmm.
because of video games, right? And I remember this
Hmm.
one called Real Racing 3, which is what I used to play in I
Yeah.
think
I
middle
I
school.
played Real Racing 3. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I
Hmm.
remember just seeing the McLaren and just seeing how good it looked, right? The way it was designed
Hmm.
and just saving up like over like weeks all my in-game currency just to purchase that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like the first time I saw it, like I just like
Hmm.
saw how good McLarens look. That's actually like I remember like going and like googling the different like models of McLarens, seeing just
Hmm.
how they've made every single car just look beautiful, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
because of
McLarens are
that,
beautiful cars.
yeah,
Hmm.
one of them would be the McLaren P1. Another one would
Hmm.
actually be the Dodge Challenger, and that's actually just solely because of
American
Fast and
Muscle.
Furious.
Yeah.
Yeah, American Muscle, Fast and
Fast and
Furious.
Furious. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Like that's the only reason. And yeah, those are my two
Hmm.
main ones. And I guess for a third one, I'd go with the
Hmm.
Aston Martin or Vulcan, just because when
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Good
I saw
Very
it for
choice.
cool
the
car.
first. I saw it for the first time when watching the Grand Tour. It was like one of the first few episodes
Yeah.
of the first season,
Hmm.
right? And I remember them
Hmm.
introducing it, and I just went insane when I saw it because it just looks
Yeah.
amazing. Obviously, what you
Really
You
cool
couldn't, you
car.
know,
can't,
if
yeah,
you don't mind, actually,
yeah,
if we're abolishing the road legal rules, so to speak,
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to mention the Mercedes
Yeah.
W11 from the 2020 Formula One season. Of
Ooh,
course,
yeah.
technologically an immense car. But then again, all Formula One cars are technologically immense. But just
Mm-hmm.
um, the fact that there was not a single weakness in that car through every season of Mercedes dominance, they've had those 2 or 3 bogey tracks each season where something's not
Yeah.
worked in the car, where Red Bull's beaten them or Ferrari's beaten them. But this
Mm-hmm.
car was untouchable on every track, and untouchable not by a tenth or 2 tenths, but untouchable by almost a second to Red Bull
Yeah.
on
It never
any
lost.
given day. It
Almost
was
never lost.
to think that minus bad luck at Italy
Mm-hmm.
and bad luck at Sakir with Perez and Gasly winning those races.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the last race at Abu Dhabi where they conserved their engines and Verstappen won. To
Mm-hmm.
think that they had the fastest car at every race weekend they came to that year was
Is
it is
insane.
insane. And
It's
my
perfection.
respect for
It's
Mercedes
as
that
close
day.
as you can get to
Yeah.
perfection.
I think
Yeah.
that is arguably the most, I would say, in my opinion, the most dominant
Mm-hmm.
car Formula One has seen and will ever see. And I think also the fastest car Formula One will see and has ever seen, because next
Yeah.
year the rule changes are going to drastically slow down the cars by like 5 to 7 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So
For a couple of years at least, yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
probably.
Yeah.
I don't see
100%.
them reaching that performance of the W11
Mm-hmm.
anytime soon. I think for that reason,
Yeah,
also one of my favorite cars right up there.
definitely.
So, Saksham, what are
I don't
yours?
know. Mine's a mix. Mine's a mix. I have a lot of old cars in there. Jaguar E-Type for me is one of the most, if not the most beautiful car ever built. It's just shape. It's just the shape and the aura behind it. Like when you're driving a Jaguar E-Type, it doesn't matter what you look like. You look beautiful. You look great driving that car. It's just so sleek and just so perfectly proportionate and well balanced. Not the best car to drive again. Not the fastest car. Obviously it's like, I don't know, 80, no, 60 years old at this point. uh so yeah, but it's just something so cool about that car, something so timeless about the design that I'll definitely still get one in the future, if I ever got the opportunity to. um Second one would be a Porsche 919. I think that car perfectly encapsulates, like, take a rule book and throw it out the window. Porsche wanted to make, I think they wanted to get into the F1 engine program, but they never really did because of costs or whatever other reasons they had. And they took their Le Mans winning car, which was already an engineering marvel, and it was already winning all the races that were there at Le Mans. And they essentially took the Le Mans rule book and just threw it out the window. They essentially took the car, tuned up the horsepower, removed everything extra they needed, no safety equipment whatsoever, right? And they built the fastest car they could possibly build. And that car blitzed the Nürburgring ring lap record, and till this date actually is the most bonkers car ever. Like, it's just nuts. It's something nobody would ever build, something you can't drive on the road, something you can't even drive on the track if you aren't skilled enough. But it's just pure perfection. It's the best engineers in the world being let loose and being allowed to do whatever they want to do, essentially, and that's the result of it. And it's the
Um,
purest form of, like, the highest
Saksham,
level of
the
engineering. Yeah.
the interesting thing is, I think the 919
Hmm.
you're speaking of is the old one, the 1960s, 70s, sorry, the 1970s one, right?
No. This is the new ones. It's the 919s.
Evo,
Like
the
the
919
Evo.
Evo,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, the Evo, the
Yeah,
Evo.
yeah, okay, yeah.
The
I was
version
just
where
gonna
they
say
they built it without the rule book. Yes, so
rule
they
book,
took the
exactly,
919 car already. They built
exactly,
on
yeah.
it to improve it to a different level altogether. Yeah. And then number three for me again, but like still one of my favorite cars of all time is the McLaren F1. It's the quintessential supercar. It's McLaren just taking everything good about them, and at the time they didn't really make many cars. They didn't make road cars at all. Actually, they only made race cars. It was the first or the second, or like the first few road cars they built, and it was perfection. It was perfection on the first step. It was the fastest naturally aspirated car till date, the fastest car at the time. The engine bay was made of gold. Had gold lining on it. It had a central driving position, so you had three seats in the car, uncommon. The driver sat in the middle, and the two passengers on the side, like behind. It felt like a spaceship, and it was truly incredible. McLaren F1, I don't think there's ever going to be a hypercar that's truly built like the McLaren F1 ever again.
And
I don't think they could do it.
that's the crazy part, because if you see McLaren design over the years, I think just the best sort of example, the best proof I would use to show just how good the McLaren F1 is, that McLaren hasn't changed their design philosophy that much since the McLaren
Mm-hmm.
F1. Most of the McLarens that have come out, even be it the
Yeah.
McLaren Senna for that matter, granted they
Mm-hmm.
look different. You can point out which one is which, but at
Mm-hmm.
the core, at the aerodynamic core of it, it does resemble the F1 a lot, and it just
Yeah.
shows how
It's a
good the
consistent
F1
design
was at
philosophy,
what they did.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And almost every car after the F1 resembles the F1 in some way. It's taken all other hypercars, supercars after the McLaren F1 has taken certain cues and certain learnings from that car. It's the
Absolutely.
first and the best and the perfect iteration of a supercar that McLaren got right the first time, and it's truly a marvel, in every sense of the word. Yeah. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this podcast. How long are we recording for? We're recording for 3.5 hours now. This just goes to show how much we love cars. We're just such huge
Yeah.
fans of cars. We've been talking for 3.5 hours.
Oh, to think
Yeah.
I have 3 more years of this.
Yeah. You better like cars. We're gonna study for 3.5 years more. Yeah, I mean it's great. It's been great having you on, Hushrav. Truly,
Thank
I
you.
mean I've
Same to
learned
you
Yeah,
guys.
so much, so much from you.
Yeah, it's been a great experience. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean let us know in the comments.
Same to
Let
you
us
guys.
know how you guys liked Hushrav. Let us know what other guests we should have, what other topics we should cover. Like, share, subscribe, just general stuff.
And just keep coming back and watching.
we'll. Yep, and we got some great interesting topics planned for you guys. We're recording these back to back. Actually recording this after the first episode went out, and it's become the most viewed video on our channel. Thanks, it's the most liked video as well. So yeah, it's going well. We love to see you guys supporting the podcast, and we hope you guys continue doing so.
Yeah, just
Yep.
keep commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing, and
Yeah,
keep
go
coming
follow
back.
Hushrav's Breakdown F1 Instagram page. Go follow Hushrav on his social media handles.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, nice. And we'll
that's
see you
all.
guys in a bit.
Next episode. Yep.
Bye bye.
That's all.
Peace.
Bye.
Goodbye, guys.